Independent, real, powered by truth. We don't just report, we connect. Thanks to a worldwide community that stands for truth. This is ILTV, your source for Israel in English.
Welcome back to ILTV on the Hour. I'm Sivan Raviv, coming to you live from Israel with all of the biggest headlines from across the region. It's currently 7 a.m. in New York and 2 p.m. here in Israel. Let's recap all of the latest developments. U.S. President Donald Trump says the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz announced yesterday is set to take effect today at 5 p.m. Israel time, just a few hours from now. Trump says he has ordered U.S. Central Command to block all vessels headed to and from Iranian ports. At the same time, he said the ceasefire with Iran is holding well and expressed hope that Tehran could still return to the negotiating table. Let's take a listen to Trump.
You probably heard that a lot of very good things are happening with regard to the Strait, Hormuz, and a lot of good things are happening for our country. It's been very strong. I would say it's holding well. Their military is destroyed. At 10 o'clock tomorrow, we have a blockade going into effect. That'll be 10 o'clock tomorrow. Other nations are working so that Iran will not be able to sell oil. What we notice and what we see and what I think is maybe my idea, maybe not, I don't know. But there are many boats heading toward our country to fill up with oil and then go and take it. So they're not going to go through the Hormuz Strait. And ultimately that'll be corrected.
And as the U.S. imposes a blockade on the Strait of Hormuz, the IDF in Israel is preparing for a possible renewed conflict with Iran if there is a sudden collapse of the U.S.-Iran ceasefire. In what appears to be a coordinated leak by defense officials, all major Israeli news outlets are reporting that the military is not only increasing readiness, but also preparing for a possible Iranian surprise attack on Israel. A senior defense official is reported saying Israel may be considering renewed pressure on Iran over its nuclear and ballistic missile programs. The IDF alert level has reportedly been significantly raised, with Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir ordering broad combat readiness procedures and preparations for an immediate resumption of fighting. Zamir instructed the military to move to a heightened state of readiness, with all units ordered to maintain high alert amid the collapse of negotiations between the U.S. and Iran. President Donald Trump moved forward with the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz after Iran rejected key U.S. demands in ongoing diplomatic talks. U.S. officials say Tehran has refused to halt uranium enrichment or dismantle core nuclear facilities, central conditions set by Washington. Iran also rejected calls to end support for regional proxy groups and to fully reopen the strait to international shipping. In response, Iran's Revolutionary Guard is warning that any military presence in the area could be seen as a violation of the ceasefire and may trigger a forceful response. The IRGC insists the strait remains under its control and warns that any wrong move by foreign vessels could have serious consequences and may be trapped in a deadly vortex in the strait. An Israeli ground operation is underway in the southern Lebanese town of Bin Jbeil, a key Hezbollah stronghold, with dozens of terrorists surrounded or fleeing the area. An Israeli ground operation is underway there because troops raided a hospital used by Hezbollah, killing around 20 gunmen and seizing weapons after coming under fire from inside. The IDF says the site was used for military purposes. In a separate operation, troops eliminated the cell responsible for killing IDF Golani soldier, Staff Sergeant Tuval Yosef Lipschitz, earlier this month. Here's Prime Minister Netanyahu on this.
מה שאנחנו רואים זה שאנחנו סיכלנו את איום הפלישה בלבנון באמצעות רצועת הביטחון הזאת. מרחיקים את סכנת ירי הנ"ט וגם מטפלים בתמ"ס, אבל יש עוד עבודה לעשות. עשינו עבודה ענקית, הישגים אדירים, יש עוד מה לעשות ואנחנו עושים אותה. אחד הדברים שאנחנו רואים כאן זה שבעצם שינינו את פני המזרח התיכון. האויבים שלנו, איראן וציר הרשע, הם באו להשמיד אותנו, וכעת הם נלחמים פשוט על ההישרדות שלהם. אנחנו רואים את זה בכל זירה וזירה, וזה הישג אדיר של מדינת ישראל, לצבא ההגנה לישראל, חיילי הסדיר וחיילי המילואים הנהדרים שלנו. תודה לכם חבר'ה, עם ישראל מצדיע לכם, תודה לכם. תודה לך.
And the first direct Israel-Lebanon talks in decades are set for tomorrow at the U.S. State Department in Washington under American mediation. Israeli Ambassador Yechiel Leiter and Lebanese Ambassador Nada Hamadeh Mawad are due to meet and work toward an agreement between the nations to disarm Hezbollah. Hezbollah supporters took to the streets in Lebanon over the weekend to protest the upcoming direct negotiations between Israel and Lebanon. However, according to Lebanese media, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar pressured Hezbollah-allied parliament speaker Nabi Berri to halt the unrest, warning that street protests could escalate into broader instability. Reports say the pressure was aimed at preventing any moves that could undermine the Lebanese government or disrupt the planned negotiations with Israel. Reports indicate the protest movement failed to gain the momentum organizers expected and did not sway Prime Minister Nawaf Salam from advancing with the talks. The meeting in Washington is expected to focus on a possible ceasefire framework, a timeline for formal negotiations, and broader security arrangements along the border. But major gaps remain. Lebanon is demanding a ceasefire first, while Israel insists talks can proceed even as fighting continues. The talks come amid ongoing clashes and mark the first direct engagement between the two sides since the 1980s. The central obstacle remains Hezbollah, with Israel seeking disarmament and security guarantees, while the group rejects the process. For now, expectations are low, with officials viewing the talks as a first step toward de-escalation rather than an immediate breakthrough. And opposition leader Yair Lapid has congratulated Peter Magyar following his Tisza party projected electoral victory in Hungary, ending Viktor Orban's 16-year rule in the country. Writing on X, Lapid posted, "I hope that under your leadership, the relations between Israel and Hungary will continue to deepen and strengthen. The result marks a significant political shift in Budapest, where Orban has been one of Israel's strongest allies inside the European Union." Last month, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had praised Orban, saying his rule brought safety, security, stability, and was like a rock in support of Israel. The election result is raising concerns in Israel over what a new government in Budapest could mean for its position in Europe. Hungary under Orban has been one of Israel's most reliable allies inside the European Union, often willing to break consensus and shield Jerusalem from criticism or punitive measures. Orban maintained close ties with Prime Minister Netanyahu and US President Trump and has frequently clashed with broader EU policy. In recent months, his government even announced plans to withdraw from the ICC after it issued an arrest warrant for Netanyahu. Experts say that while Hungary's political backing has been important, its practical impact on EU policy may be more limited, and the change in leadership is unlikely to dramatically alter Israel-Hungary relations in the short term. And as the U.S. blockade is set to take effect in just a few hours and the region may move closer to a broader confrontation with Iran, we're now joined by Professor Eyal Zisser, Middle East expert from Tel Aviv University, and Lieutenant Colonel in Reserves Avital Leibovich, Director of AJC Jerusalem. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
So we're now seeing a U.S. naval blockade in the Strait of Hormuz set to begin hours from now. How significant of a moment is this in the context of the war? Eyal, what do you think?
Well, it's significant, but of course, it doesn't mean that we are heading toward an escalation. I mean, instead of bombing Iran, Trump tries something else to avoid deterioration and escalation. I mean, the closure is not a direct military attack. And this is a signal that still is ready to negotiate and is trying to put more pressure. So I think that there is no any immediate threat to the ceasefire, but of course, in the long run, if we don't reach an agreement, we may face a new round of violence. But basically, all sides, I mean, clearly the Iranians and the Americans want to avoid it. We will simply have to wait and see what will happen in the future and how Trump will wake up in the morning tomorrow, the day after, Well, it's after all about Trump, isn't it?
Yes, and we know how predictable or unpredictable Trump can be. Avital, what do you think? How significant of a moment is this right now?
I think basically the Americans are trying to send a message of persistence. In other words, we see the Iranian in the last couple of days really show great security, self-confidence. Actually, the fact that you have J.D. Vance sitting across Kalibaf and others, from their perspective, from the Iranian perspective, they perceive themselves as equal among equals to the Americans. And they are spreading this narrative of huge victory and the fact that the Americans surrender. So President Trump comes now and says just the opposite. I'm not willing to be played with. I'm not willing to be in a situation in which the Iranians are stalling time more and more. Unfortunately, the Iranians did not fulfill their part in the ceasefire agreement, and therefore business is business. And I plan to stand behind my declarations. And that's why the target was an economic target that was chosen. I believe this was some kind of hint about the future possibilities of economic assets in Iran, which, as we have seen in the talks, is one of the most critical things for the Iranians, because half of the delegation, which Iran sent to Islamabad, was filled with people with economic backgrounds. So the issue of the money, of the funding, of the sanctions is something very critical. And that's the reason I believe that this sort of economic target has been chosen by the Americans.
So now this comes right after the talks collapsed, as we know. Do you guys, both of you, I'd like to hear your opinion. Do you think that there's any realistic path back to diplomacy from here? Eyal, what do you think?
It's hard. It's hard to say. I mean, once again, it's up to Trump to decide. I mean, the Iranian will not give up. It's quite clear, and it's up to Trump to decide whether he gives up, declare victory. He already declared that he won the war, and that he destroyed the navy, Iranian navy, as if Iran had hundreds of carriers and whatever. And give up as for the significant issues, or he may decide that he wants to go on. It's really hard to say when it comes to Trump. Of course, the economic factor, of course, the midterm elections in the United States, of course, many other things. But after all, it comes back to Trump, and it's very difficult to assess what he might decide to do.
Avital, do you think that the track of diplomacy is over, or there's still a chance for that?
I would say there are three options, right? The first option is somehow to reach some sort of a diplomatic agreement. It doesn't have to be a full diplomatic agreement, it can be a partial one. The second option is to just declare that the Americans decided to end the current conflict without an agreement. And the third option is to continue the conflict. And even here, there are a few options. Let's say we are continuing the conflict. It could be actually done in different levels. One option could be not going to the full-scale military course as we have seen in the 40 days, and maybe attacking very strongly a few main assets, strategic assets, economic assets, energy plants, different kinds of water plants, desalination plants. So that could also be something of a return, a semi-return to the fight. Look, the 21-hour talks that took place in Islamabad on Saturday, on Shabbat, told us one very clear thing, that there is no change in the Iranian position from February till today. I do want to say, however, that Iran is in a different place because there are many, many achievements from the 40 days that Israel and the US has targeted, thousands of targets all across Iran. However, having said that, from an Israeli perspective, the red line is one. It's not the Hormuz Straits. It's the enriched uranium. And if this conflict ends without a diplomatic agreement that actually takes care of the issue of the enriched uranium, but ends up with another diplomatic agreement, then I don't think this will be sufficient from an Israeli perspective. And Israel would have liked to keep the option, the open option, maybe to return and attack Iran in a future period of time.
Now, you mentioned this historic meeting in Pakistan with high-level officials for the first time in 47 years, pretty historic meeting face-to-face like that. What do you think went wrong over there? What was the and what was the significance of the face-to-face? We haven't seen that yet. Avital.
So I would say the concessions. I don't see a situation in which the Iranians, which have been investing 47 years in planning, building, investing in this nuclear infrastructure plans, I don't see them just sitting around the table and agreeing to give it up in return to releasing frozen funds, even if it's billions of funds. I just don't see that happening. So I think that on the one hand, the Iranians came to the talks in a very self-secured, confident situation, which does not match the reality on the ground, does not match what they have been suffering for the last 40 days. And again, we're talking about people. I mean, Kalibaf. Who is Kalibaf? Kalibaf is one of the founders of the Revolutionary Guards. So these are hard ideologists. And I think that's something that will be very difficult to bridge between the two sides.
Eyal, the Iranians, they don't show much flexibility in these talks and in previous ones, and neither do the Americans at this point. So it was said that there's no daylight between the two. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think that the Iranian felt that they won. I mean, this was their reading. I mean, because the war was all about, as it was presented at the beginning, about bringing an end to the current regime in Tehran, and this didn't happen. And at the same time, yes, Israel and the United States attack this airport, this airplane, this port, that port, but all in all, Iran is so big, and they hide it very successfully, those losses. And on the other hand, the chaos they created, including the launching of rockets toward Israel. So in the reading, they won. And they thought that, well, the United States got it, want to bring this war to an end, and want actually to capitulate. I mean, to reach some sort of an agreement that will give Iran everything. And the fact that Vance was sent, and we know that G. Vance was against the war from the early beginning, was some sort of a sign that, well, the Americans are to capitulate. But this somehow didn't happen. And once again, it's very hard for me. I know where the Iranians stand. It's very hard for me to understand where the Americans are standing and what are the endgame, and whether Trump is ready to go all the way. I mean, to renew the attacks. And when he renewed the attacks, there is no question of limited attacks, because the Iranian can react, and you want a limited war, and the Iranian expand it. So it's not in the Trump hands, and it's
because it really seems like the Iranians they're never ready to surrender on anything.
Well, that's the Iranian. I mean, you want them. It's not an issue. It's the essence of this regime. It's right. What this regime is all about. Proud nation, independent, having the last word. It's all about. You don't ask them to capitulate or to give up on this item or that up. You want them to give up about what they are. And they are not ready to do so.
Right. Well, now assuming that this naval blockade goes through and that's the situation, how would Iran choose to respond? What could you predict, Avital? What are the most likely scenarios should Israel brace itself for an attack? Avital.
Yeah, I mean, an attack is possible. Look, we know what weapons ammunition they really have. They have either explosive drones that can carry explosives, but they haven't used those against Israel. They did use them against the Gulf states. And they can fire here a few ballistic missiles. But I think they will put the pressure on the Gulf states. We've seen that the initial strategy of Iran was to put pressure, conduct pressure on the Gulf states and other countries in the region, 12 countries in total. 75% of the fire Iran actually opened during the last 40 days was allocated to these countries, not to Israel. And the strategy was that this pressure would actually lead them to try and pressure the US to stop the war, which obviously brought just the opposite result. So I would assume that they would attack the ports in the Gulf states, maybe in Saudi, maybe in Oman as well, in Kuwait, other countries as well, in order to, not give the feeling of surrender and say and prove that they're still in the game, and also prove to their own public that they're still fighting, and the strongest army in the world cannot beat them.
Now, Eyal, what do you think? Will they go for the Gulf states? Perhaps is using their proxies an option of a reaction? We haven't heard from the Houthis lately.
Well, not immediately. I don't think that there is any need right now for any immediate response. It's some sort of a war of attrition. I mean, not a war, but who will give up first? Whether it will be Trump, because it's not only a closure on Iran, it's also a closure on the Gulf states and the supply of energy to the entire world. And that's what made the change in Trump's mind at the first place. So they can wait another week, another 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and see maybe the rise of the energy prices will put a pressure on Trump. Right. So they don't need immediately to respond militarily. They can wait some time, and then they could put military pressure, but not immediately.
Now, we're already seeing oil prices spiking and shipping disrupted. How much of a global crisis could this become, Eyal?
Well, it's hard to say. I'm following the American channels, and it's not an issue. I mean, not the energy, the oil price, but the war itself. It's not the first item in most of, Fox or other TV channels. So for the Americans, it's only the energy price, of course. But once again, it's up to Trump, because he's concerned not about Europe, not about the Far East. He's concerned about the United States. And once again, it's hard to see where are we heading.
From Israel's perspective, Avital, does Trump's move with this blockade, does it help achieve strategic goals or not?
From Israel's perspective, the most critical thing is not the economic side of the war, but rather the nuclear capabilities. How do you prevent those enriched uranium, those 460 kilograms of enriched uranium, from reaching the wrong hands and then perhaps serving as 10 nuclear bombs? So this is the main thing. This is the main concern of Israel. And by the way, what I'm hearing from President Trump from 2011, actually, this is not something new, that at least on the nuclear front, he's very consistent in his messaging. And since 2011, and even in the last couple of hours, he said that a nuclear Iran would be a global threat. And at least from an Israeli point of view, this is the most critical thing, the most important thing. But one thing about the oil, which I have to point out in your previous question, that Israel and other countries who were signatories to an MOU called IMEC, India, Middle East Economic Corridor. This was signed in September 23, and basically it looked for routes of shipping different cargo from Asia to Europe through the Middle East. And now what we are seeing, which is a positive thing, is actually new routes across the Middle East, trying to ship cargo, oil, infrastructure materials, others, due to the Hormuz Straits issue. And I think this will also bring opportunities to Israel and lead it to maybe joint ventures with other countries, even countries which Israel doesn't have formal relations with.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'd like to move on to Lebanon and the Lebanese front. We're seeing the first direct talks between Israel and Lebanon in decades. How significant is this, and how realistic are the expectations, Eyal?
No, these are not significant. I mean, it's more of a political move with no real essence. I mean, of course, the Lebanese want a ceasefire, and of course, the Lebanese are ready to speak about implementing a ceasefire. But this government has good intentions, but has no any ability to impose any decision it made regarding Hezbollah on the ground. So you know, what the Lebanese expect Israel to do is to ceasefire and let the Lebanese handle with Hezbollah, something they failed to do during the last 4 decades, and clearly they will fail to do in the future. So, of course, under American pressure, we can reach some sort of an agreement regarding ceasefire that will have no essence. The border will be quiet once again, but the Hezbollah will be left on the other side waiting for the coming opportunities. So I don't see any significance to these talks. They will not lead anywhere. They can lead to an agreement that will not be implemented and will not have any meaning on the ground.
Avital, what do you think about this? Israel is obviously pushing for Hezbollah's disarmament, but Hezbollah is rejecting this entire process. Obviously, they're threatening civil war. Does that make these talks doomed from the start? Can the Lebanese government even be trusted with attempting to disarm Hezbollah?
So let's talk about the positive angles and the negative angles. So in November 2024, Israel did sign an agreement, a ceasefire agreement with Lebanon, and America mediated here. And basically, this agreement called out for the Lebanese armed forces to clear from Hezbollah and weapons the entire South Lebanon, south of the Litani River. And yesterday, the IDF revealed footage of weapons that were found in a government hospital, not just a private hospital, a government hospital in the town Bin Jbel in South Lebanon. So you can understand that the gap of what they were supposed to do and the ultimate result was huge. Basically, the Lebanese army was not able to deliver. And the laws in Lebanon actually give different sects in the society, different places, different roles. So, for example, 50% of the members of the Lebanese armed forces are Shiites. And in this way, how could we ever see a change in the Lebanese army? The government is saying the right things, and this is the positive. We are noticing a positive change in the rhetoric, even on media. Social media influencers, important journalists, analysts, they are all saying that for the first time, Hezbollah should be outlawed. I even saw that one of them suggested a criminal court that will indict Hezbollah. And many of them actually support normalization with Israel. But de facto, I don't really see that option maturing. And you know what? I'm waiting to see the talks tomorrow. I'm waiting to see if, number one, there will be a photo op. And number two, if that photo op would include a Lebanese flag next to an Israeli flag. I think that should be interesting. That maybe will tell us the story.
Now, Eyal, Israel is expanding its buffer zone in southern Lebanon. Obviously, the residents of Israel's north are susceptible to so many strikes. There are so many sirens, dozens of sirens a day. They're in and out of shelters. Will this actually improve security for the northern residents?
No, because what Israel is doing is something very gradual, very limited. I mean, the Israeli move is very limited. It's very partial. I mean, it's not a total war. It's limited military operation aimed at limited areas that will not influence the. I don't know why. I don't know why the military decision makers and mainly the political decision makers didn't make up a decision to launch a total war against Hezbollah. What we are doing in Lebanon, I'm following the Lebanese media, it's quite very partial, very limited, and this itself will not remove the Hezbollah threat. Hezbollah can continue launching rockets from areas beyond the security zone and from areas north to the Litani River. So it will take time, and we can reach it either by expanded military operation or by some sort of an agreement that will not bring real will not really remove the threat of Hezbollah, but at least will ensure ceasefire for some time. These are the options.
Right. Well, Professor Eyal Zisser and Avital Leibovitz, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And for residents in Israel's north, just as we mentioned, this is not just theoretical talk, it's daily life under fire, even with the so-called ceasefire in place at the moment. Joining us now is a resident from the north, living through constant Hezbollah attacks. I'd like to say hello to Josiah Dekanu, resident of Netua in the Israeli north. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So please tell me, what does a typical day look like for you right now as there is this so-called ceasefire with Iran?
Well, there's no ceasefire with Hezbollah, clearly.
That's right.
So, we thought that the October, I was up here, by the way, I'm 1 mile or about 1.5 kilometers away from the Lebanese border. So we are so close, we hear the rockets actually being launched. We thought that the October 7th war was a conflict or a war, and now we know, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the IDF by any means, but as an on-the-ground observer, now we know that we were extremely restrained in the last conflict. This conflict, there are artillery fires taking place multiple times an hour, helicopters flying overhead. You can hear the stingers. At 5:30 this morning, I was awake and I could hear machine gun fire. We're that close, kind of thing. So the one thing that, the relief that we do have, I was listening to your last guest. He's absolutely correct. The one relief that we do have that we didn't have during the last conflict is with the IDF over there, with them pushing them back. Clearly, they've probably taken out, and I'm not speaking on behalf of official news, but the closest proximity launchers, because in the last conflict, we had maybe 8 seconds to get to a bomb shelter. Now we have 15 seconds.
Which is still so little.
Yeah, but the big relief is the anti-tank missiles. A number of fatalities, casualties were those anti-tank missiles, which require Hezbollah to have line of sight. And so having the IDF engaging on the other side of the line instead of in a defensive mode at least has eliminated that threat from most of us. But that's the day in the life, every day, multiple times to the bomb shelter.
How has this been affecting your family and your own sense of security?
So, during the previous engagement, we were evacuated. Most of us were evacuated. I stayed to help folks out. They're not evacuated now. That means my grandchildren are very, very close to me. They spend most of their time extremely close to a bomb shelter, if not in a bomb shelter. We're sleeping in the bomb shelter for sure. And even trips to the grocery store, you have to know taking a dog on a walk, you have to know where every single bomb shelter, those portable bomb shelters are in case a siren goes off. So we're greatly impacted by the conflict. I mean, it's every day, it's every moment of the day.
Have you considered leaving the north, or do you feel determined to stay despite the situation?
So, I was asked that before. People ask me, my family ask me, they say, why are you still there? And it's strange how we answered that. The folks of the North are very resilient. If we gave up the North, if we just decided collectively as a country, okay, it's not worth it, let's pull back. We know our neighbors, we know their resolve to wipe us out. If we did that 6 months from now, we would be debating the cost analysis on keeping Akko, and a year from now, Haifa. And so there's a resilience up here that they founded this little yeshuv in the 60s, and they don't intend to give it up. And if we don't stay, we're staying to hold the ground, really.
Now, Netanyahu paid a visit to the north this week. If you could speak directly to him, what would you say?
Well, the negotiations that are taking place in Iran, trying to add a ceasefire with Hezbollah, it's very frustrating for us in the north. There are people in this town, men in this town, that fought this same war in 2006. Now we're at 2026. We're fighting the same war. My sons, I have 3 sons, our sons are fighting this war. If we don't finish this, I don't want my grandchildren to be fighting this same war 20 years from now. I do believe we have friends in Lebanon. I believe they don't want this to continue. We should nurture that. That is not going to be an agreement with Hezbollah. It's going to be an agreement with Lebanon. So I think, speaking on behalf of most of the residents of the North, that's our feeling, is we're taking this brunt, but let's finish this. We can't have 100,000 rockets just in stockpile, ready to fire at us at any given moment.
And now with these diplomatic talks set for tomorrow, do you have hope for change? Do you believe that it's possible?
I agree with your previous guest that it's not likely. Lebanon doesn't currently have the strength to do anything about Hezbollah, but there's some real promising conversations that are taking place. It's got to happen. If Lebanon is talking the same story, then the world's hearing a better story, I think. They're hearing our side of the story too, instead of maybe the rhetoric.
Well, thank you very much, Josiah Dekanu. Thank you very much for speaking to us, and keep safe.
My pleasure. Thank you for having us.
And finally, from the reality of war to a story of resilience and spirit, Israel's national cheerleading team is heading to the World Championship after months of training in shelters and under sirens. Joining us now is the president of the Israeli Cheer Union, Dr. Ludmila Yasinska-Damri. Thank you very much for joining. So this is a historic first for Israel. Reach the world stage. We don't hear you. You need to put your sound on.
Yeah. Now it's okay. Yeah, so for us it's really historical moment because that's the first time that the whole team of Israel, national team, representing our country and the world stage in a really very, very hard time that we are living. But we are doing it, and we hope that we can fly, because also we have a situation in Israel that is very the amount of the people on the flights is all the time changing. So we really hope that we can fly and we can do whatever we're prepared for all this time.
Now, we hear that the athletes were training in shelters and some were even displaced from their homes. What did that look like in real life? Tell me about this.
Yeah, so we have the team that is including different athletes from all over Israel, like from the north to the south, and because of the situation and the war that we had, it was very dangerous to drive every day to the training. So the place that we are training is in the center of Israel, and half of the team, around 10 to 12 girls, were living in our houses, in houses of other athletes in the center, far from their home, far from their families, and just they came for training. And also with all this, we had a lot of sirens during the training time. So like every 30 minutes, every 1 hour, we were going to the bomb shelter, and we understand that this is not the way that we can get the results done. So we were continuing just training in the shelter, in the corridors, wherever we can.
Mm-hmm. And now some of these girls, like we said, left their homes, lived together due to the ongoing fire, just so they can keep training. What does that say about their commitment?
The commitment is unbelievable, and it's so nice to see the girls and the families and the parents that they leave, they give their kids to participate and to go so far. You know, it's not easy to give to the girl 12 or 13 years old to drive to the other part of the country alone. For the first time to live around 10 days in the house of different people, different families. But we had a really great experience. We had Shabbat together, like 20 kids together, celebrating and sitting together. We were hoping that will not be the sirens, because our shelter in the house is not so big to include all these people, but we had luck, and everything was really nice, and it was a great atmosphere. The spirit of the girls is so good. We are so happy to go there, and we are ready for everything that can happen. We have half of the dresses didn't come yet to Israel because of the war. We don't have all the palms, so we have like dresses are coming from Ukraine with Ukrainian team straight to United States. We have palms that come straight to the competition, but we believe that everything will be okay.
And how do you keep young athletes focused, motivated, even positive in the middle of a war?
I think that's the thing that holds us together. That's the thing that gives us power to continue to move on, to say that we are the strong country, we are the part of the strong big family of Israel and also of the cheerleading in Israel, that we have a target, we are together, we help each other, we believe that everything will be okay. We have our target that we were working for 1 year really, really hard, and all of the kids, we don't have to tell them, you know, like what to do. They know, they work hard by themselves. They are coming, they're training even outside of the gym. They are training by themselves just to get the best result that they can, and to show that Israel is a country that cannot be broken. We're standing together, we are moving together, and we will get to our target together, because it's the good thing, it's the sport, it's the health, and it's our place on the world map.
And you'll be competing against some of the world's strongest teams. What are your expectations?
Yeah, we are going to compete against a lot of teams like United States and Japan and other countries that they are really, really strong. We understand that the cheerleading in Israel exists almost 3 years, comparing to the other countries like United States, that it's more than 50 years. And the amount of the athletes and the possibility, the financial possibility to go to such a competition is very limited, because we don't have any help from the country right now. So all the expenses are paid by the parents, by the families, that they are also going through the difficult times of the war. And it's really this participation in this competition is very, very hard given to us, but we are giving 100%.
And just finally, in a few words, what does this mean for the athletes to represent Israel right now on a global platform like this?
It's the thing to show that Israel is a country, independent, strong, that developed in all the sides of the sport and also the community. We have really strong community, and
Briefly.
but in the same time, we also understand that we have to have some, safety things that we have to keep. Like we are flying. With
Well,
all
I
our
have to
clothes.
cut you off because we're finalizing, but I wish you good luck and be
Thank you
strong.
so much.
Now, that's a wrap for this edition of ILTV on the Hour, broadcasting live from Israel in the heart of the Middle East. We're here every hour on the hour with the latest breaking developments, in-depth reports, and exclusive insights into the stories shaping the region.
Well, now joining us to shed some light on this new ceasefire, its viability, and what we can expect to see is Jonathan Schanzer of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Jonathan, always a pleasure to have you join us. To start, what is your take on this ceasefire? Is this the capitulation to the Islamic regime as the regime claims, or is this part of a grander plan?
I think it's neither. I'm not sure it's capitulation yet, and I'm certainly not seeing a broader plan, at least not yet. I think what we're looking at right now is a moment of pause that the president is trying to allow for cooler heads to prevail. In other words, the Hormuz crisis has obviously jolted U.S. markets. It's jolted the price of oil and the price of natural gas, and it certainly, I think, has a lot of our allies rattled. And so I think there's an attempt here to try to figure out whether we can get to some point of stasis as it relates to international trade and energy. But I am getting the sense right now from the Islamic Republic that they're not interested in allowing for cooler heads to prevail. They appear to be ready to continue to fight. They're insisting that Lebanon be part of this deal. That is something that the United States has rejected, that was never part of the deal. Certainly Israel doesn't accept that either. They're also saying that they want to limit the number of tankers that go through the Strait of Hormuz. They're talking about charging money for every tanker that goes through. All of this is going to be unacceptable to the United States. So all eyes on Islamabad this weekend. If they can arrive at a common narrative, maybe they pause for longer, but I'm getting the sense right now that we are careening toward renewed crisis, and so this would be a pause at best.
Now, what do you think the likelihood is of successful negotiations? I mean, given that there seem to be irreconcilable differences already in just the initial demands?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think a lot of this really depends on the Islamic Republic and whether they want to have all of this bombing stop. At the end of the day, this regime wants one thing above all else, and that is survival. And so if they fear that their survival is at stake, they may agree to some kind of a longer ceasefire or even something more permanent than that. I think that when Donald Trump started threatening to destroy an ancient civilization, when he started talking about destroying energy infrastructure and bridges and railroads, I think that did get the attention of the Islamic Republic. I think that's how we arrived at this moment. But I am still very concerned that whatever was agreed to on both sides that was brokered by Pakistan, that maybe they both walked away with very different sets of ideas about what this ceasefire meant, what it would entail, what the responsibilities would be on both sides. For the U.S., it looks like a very transactional thing. Open the strait and we'll stop bombing. For the Iranian regime, they're claiming total victory, that the U.S. is going to lift sanctions and remove bases from the region. None of that is realistic. So we have a real gap that needs to be bridged, and I'm not understanding how we got to this point of confusion so quickly.
Now, I want to ask you, how will this ceasefire impact what's going on in Lebanon? I mean, we've already seen this major controversy over the Islamic Republic claiming that Lebanon was included and Israel stating it wasn't included, U.S. affirming that. That's not going to happen, a ceasefire when it comes to Israel. So what will that mean in the coming 2 weeks?
Well, I mean, I think that's the big question. How will the Islamic Republic respond when Israel escalates? I mean, there's no way that Israel can back down right now. They've mobilized thousands upon thousands of troops. There is a battle plan that has already essentially started here. I mean, the waves of attacks carried out by the Israelis, airstrikes, not to mention the deployment of those troops. Calling all of that back would be extremely difficult logistically and expensive. It would be a waste of a call-up, and it's just not something that I think that Israel is going to be willing to negotiate over. It doesn't look like the United States cares a whole lot about that either. Even J.D. Vance came out and said, hey, this is not part of the deal. Israel gets to do what it wants. Lebanon will continue no matter what. The fact that we're hearing that and that the U.S. and Israel are aligned on that, to me suggests that we're going to watch escalation in Lebanon, whether or not the regime is happy with it or not. Now the question is, does the regime try to walk away from those talks in Islamabad because of what's happening in Lebanon? I think, or at least I hope anyway, that the regime understands that their survival is still on the line, their national interests are at stake, and so trying to argue for this, it was worth a shot, I think, from the perspective of Galibaf and company. But I think they're probably going to realize that this was a fool's errand, that they're going to have to just get back to the question of Strait of Hormuz and the wider attacks against the Islamic Republic. That's, I think, going to be the scope of those talks in Pakistan.
All right, well, we'll be following this closely. We're out of time for today, but as always, I want to thank you for your insights. Jonathan Schanzer from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies.
Thanks, Emily.
And now joining us to discuss negotiations and war with the Islamic regime in Iran is Norman Rule, a retired senior U.S. intelligence officer who served in the CIA, focusing primarily on the Middle East and Iran, and is now a senior advisor at United Against the Nuclear Iran. Norman, good to see you again.
Good to be with you.
As you know, we have an alarm, potentially, but we'll try to see how far we can get. In Israel, we've been closely watching the Trump ultimatum to hit Iranian energy. If they don't capitulate to his demands, the expiration date, it's now moved a few times, and now it's moved an additional day. Is that to give diplomacy another 24 hours or to finalize military plans?
It's important that we look at three things happening at once here. We're watching a continuation of military activity by the United States and Israel. We're watching an increased intensity of the Trump administration's rhetoric, and we're watching an increased intensity of the diplomatic activity by Mr. Kushner, Mr. Witkoff. All three of these activities come together, and they're meant to give one last effort at diplomacy while the United States and Israel prepare for what will be a significant increase of military activity against Iranian infrastructure. We need to understand that once this activity takes place, Iran will likely respond against GCC infrastructure, and there will be consequences in the Gulf Cooperation Council and perhaps reflections in the world economy.
Well, Norman, there's a proposal out there now, brokered by Pakistan. It outlines a two-phase deal, including reopening the Strait of Hormuz, which was never really an issue at the beginning of the war, and follow-up talks to reach a broader agreement. Though Iran has not yet responded, is this possibly going to be Trump's off-ramp?
It's possible, but Iran is going to push back on this. Iran is going to seek for two things. First, it's going to seek a permanent cessation of hostilities. And second, it's going to seek long-term control over the Strait of Hormuz, whereas the United States is seeking a temporary cessation of hostilities so that it can then push for a degradation permanently of Iran's nuclear program, its missile program, and its regional adventurism through the Quds Force. Iran doesn't want to go in that direction. So you've got two very different approaches to how this diplomacy wishes to end. Iran wants to leave this with permanent control of the Strait of Hormuz and retention of the Quds Force and retention of its missile program. So I'm not optimistic that diplomacy will succeed.
So diplomacy fails, and if the U.S. chooses the military option, what is the most likely course? Grabbing Karj Island, arming opposition groups to bring about regime change, airstrikes on key energy facilities, or all of the above?
Well, first, let's hope that diplomacy does succeed because the intensity of pressure on Iran will increase in the coming 24 to 48 hours. But if it does move forward, we're going to see, based on the intelligence and the operational conditions at the time, an increase of military action against all of Iran's infrastructure, probably Iran's leadership. We've had reports that Israel killed the head of the Revolutionary Guard intelligence operations overnight. That will likely continue. And then we're likely to see pressure on perhaps Iran's islands, such as you've mentioned, and as the president has mentioned, Iran's energy architecture.
So let me ask you this. Folks in Israel are asking about the time frame of this conflict. What is your sense? How much longer are we going to be scurrying for shelter around the clock and have airports shut down and all of the other restrictions that are going on? What would be your guess for Israel?
Unfortunately, I think the conflict is going to go on for some time. The United States and Israel will need to devote additional time and resources to Iran's theater ballistic missile and drone activity, as well as the command and control behind these activities. And this is going to take at least several weeks, in my view. But it could be hastened if additional resources will be applied to that.
But do you see any possibility, for example, if there is a 45-day ceasefire like they're discussing now, how would you expect that period to go? Do you think Iran would stop firing at Israel if they stop firing at the U.S.? Will Hezbollah stop firing? Or are we basically stuck with the Houthis and Hezbollah, and maybe Iran will stop firing and maybe not?
There's been evidence recently that Iran, the Houthis, and Lebanese Hezbollah have coordinated operations. So it would appear that if the ceasefire does occur, and if Israeli operations against Hezbollah are also included in that ceasefire, which is, again, unlikely, that you might see a simultaneous ceasefire. But again, this is complicated. It would have to be nested within several different areas of operation, which makes it unlikely to occur all at once. But if Israel were to cease operations against Iran, Iran is likely to halt operations against Israel.
Norman, what is your sense within the U.S. administration? Are they tending towards wanting to continue until the job is done? Or are they looking for a deal, a very strong deal, perhaps, a deal with Iran and giving up on the idea of regime change unless it comes from within the Iranian people?
Well, I think you've said the same thing. A job that's done might well be constraining Iran and defanging it of its strategic missile program and leaving the Strait of Hormuz outside of its control. Israel and the United States have destroyed the architecture of its nuclear program and ensuring that the architecture of oppression has been so severely damaged and degraded that the Iranian people, who have undertaken national unrest for a number of years, will likely do the same in the near term and then be able to successfully destroy what's left of the Islamic Republic in future uprisings. But again, that's up to the Iranian people to undertake, and not necessarily for the Trump administration to do.
We're once again facing a trip to the shelters. This time we'll conclude our interview. Thanks so much for being with us.
Be safe. God bless you all.
For more than 200 years, when Israel's most vulnerable needed help, Kol El Chabad was there. When families can't afford food, when seniors are alone, when children are struggling to survive, Kol El Chabad steps in with meals, essentials, and dignity. Right now, thousands of families across Israel are counting on that help. And you can make sure it reaches them. Your donation doesn't just give charity, it gives hope, it gives strength, it saves lives. Kol El Chabad, helping Israel one life at a time. Scan the QR code on your screen and give now. Step into the story of Israel's heartland with Blessed by Israel, where every purchase connects you to the land, the people, and the promise. Taste the sweetness of the promised land in their delicious honeys, or wear the story of the land close to your heart with the stunning Special Places of the Land necklace. Behind each product is a family, pioneers living in Judea and Samaria, crafting beauty and goodness from the soil of the Bible. When you buy their creations, you're not only receiving something extraordinary, you're investing in Israel's future, helping small businesses thrive and communities grow strong. Join a movement that celebrates faith, resilience, and hope. Visit blessedbyisrael.com and use ILTV's special code BLESSISRAEL, that's BLESSISRAEL, at checkout for 10% off on your first order. Be part of strengthening Israel, one purchase at a time.
Welcome to ILTV on the Hour. I'm Sivan Raviv, coming to you live from Israel with all the biggest headlines from across the region. Let's recap all of the latest developments. U.S. President Donald Trump says the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, announced yesterday, is set to take effect today at 5 p.m. Israel time, just hours from now. Trump says he has ordered U.S. Central Command to block all vessels headed to and from Iranian ports. At the same time, he said the ceasefire with Iran is holding well and expressed hope that Tehran could still return to the negotiating table. Let's take a listen to Trump.
Probably heard that a lot of very good things are happening with regard to the Strait, Hormuz, and a lot of good things are happening for our country. It's been very strong. I would say it's holding well. Their military is destroyed. At 10 o'clock tomorrow, we have a blockade going into effect. That'll be 10 o'clock tomorrow. Other nations are working so that Iran will not be able to sell oil. What we notice and what we see and what I think is maybe my idea, maybe not, I don't know, but there are many boats heading toward our country to fill up with oil and then go and take it. So they're not going to go through the Hormuz Strait. And ultimately that'll be corrected.
And as the U.S. imposes a blockade on the Strait of Hormuz, the IDF is preparing for a possible renewed conflict with Iran if there is a sudden collapse of the U.S.-Iran ceasefire. In what appears to be a coordinated leak by defense officials, all major Israeli news outlets report the military is not only increasing readiness, but also preparing for a possible Iranian surprise attack on Israel. A senior defense official is reported saying Israel may be considering renewed pressure on Iran over its nuclear and ballistic missile programs. The IDF alert level has reportedly been significantly raised, with Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir ordering broad combat readiness procedures and preparations for an immediate resumption of fighting. Zamir instructed the military to move to a heightened state of readiness, with all units ordered to maintain high alert amid the collapse of negotiations between the U.S. and Iran. President Trump moved forward with the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz after Iran rejected key U.S. demands in ongoing diplomatic talks. U.S. officials say Tehran has refused to halt uranium enrichment or dismantle core nuclear facilities, central conditions set by Washington. Iran also rejected calls to end support for regional proxy groups and to fully reopen the strait to international shipping. In response, Iran's Revolutionary Guard is warning that any military presence in the area could be seen as a violation of the ceasefire and may trigger a forceful response. The IRGC insists the strait remains under its control and warns that any wrong move by foreign vessels could have serious consequences, and they may be trapped in a deadly vortex in the strait. An Israeli ground operation is underway in the southern Lebanese town of Ben Jbeil, a key Hezbollah stronghold, with dozens of operatives surrounded or fleeing. Troops raided a hospital used by Hezbollah, killing around 20 gunmen and seizing weapons after coming under fire from inside. The IDF says the site was used for military purposes. In a separate operation, troops eliminated the cell responsible for killing IDF Golani soldier Staff Sergeant Tuval Yosef Lipschitz earlier this month. And the first direct talks between Israel and Lebanon in decades are set for tomorrow in Washington under American mediation. Israeli Ambassador Yechiel Leiter and Lebanese Ambassador Nada Hamadeh Mouad are due to meet and work toward an agreement between the nations to disarm Hezbollah. The talks come amid ongoing clashes and despite weekend protests by Hezbollah supporters in Lebanon. Regional players, including Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar, are reportedly pressuring Hezbollah allied parliament speaker Nabi Berri to halt the unrest and allow diplomacy to proceed. So far, the protests have failed to gain momentum and have not derailed the talks. Major disagreements remain. Lebanon is demanding a ceasefire before any progress, while Israel insists negotiations can continue alongside military operations. The central obstacle is Hezbollah, with Israel seeking disarmament and security guarantees, and the group flatly rejecting the process. For now, expectations are low, with officials describing the meeting as a first step toward de-escalation rather than an immediate breakthrough. Now that's a wrap for this edition of ILTV on the Hour, broadcasting live from Israel and the heart of the Middle East. I'm Sivan Raviv. Thank you very much for watching.
Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Madar Gravelazi, and coming up in today's newscast. The U.S.-Iran talks in Islamabad fail to reach an agreement. Will the war resume? Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warns more action may be needed against the Iranian regime. And the IDF continues striking terror targets in Lebanon as ceasefire talks are set to begin later this week. U.S. President Donald Trump has announced a U.S. naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. Meanwhile, IDF Chief of Staff Eyal Zamil put the IDF on alert for a possible return to war with Iran. All this after U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance says talks between the United States and Iran ended without a deal. But the talks did not explode and the ceasefire remains in place. Both sides left Islamabad after a marathon 21-hour series of direct talks. ILTV's Steve Leibovitz has the latest.
Speaking in Pakistan, Vice President Vance said negotiators are returning to the United States after Iran refused to accept American terms aimed at preventing it from developing a nuclear weapon. The high-stakes negotiations lasted 21 hours, with Vance in constant contact with President Trump.
We've been at it now for 21 hours, and we've had a number of substantive discussions with the Iranians. That's the good news. The bad news is that we have not reached an agreement, and I think that's bad news for Iran much more than it's bad news for the United States of America. So we go back to the United States having not come to an agreement. We've made very clear what our red lines are, what things we're willing to accommodate them on, and what things we're not willing to accommodate them on. And we've made that as clear as we possibly could, and they have chosen not to accept our terms.
Vance said the core U.S. demand remains a clear commitment from Iran not to pursue nuclear weapons or the capabilities needed to rapidly develop them.
Well, I won't go into all the details because I don't want to negotiate in public after we negotiated for 21 hours in private. But the simple fact is that we need to see an affirmative commitment that they will not seek a nuclear weapon and they will not seek the tools that would enable them to quickly achieve a nuclear weapon. That is the core goal of the President of the United States, and that's what we've tried to achieve through these negotiations.
After the failed talks, U.S. President Trump announced the next step would be a U.S. naval blockade on the Strait of Hormuz and vowed that Iran will never have a nuclear weapon. Iran's semi-official Tasnim news agency said excessive U.S. demands hindered reaching an agreement. A foreign ministry spokesman said the talks were held in an atmosphere of mistrust, but that it was unrealistic to expect an agreement after just one session. Pakistan called on both sides to respect the ceasefire and continue talks.
We hope that the two sides continue with the positive spirit to achieve durable peace and prosperity for the entire region and beyond. It is imperative that the parties continue to uphold their commitment to ceasefire.
The talks in Islamabad were not a success, but they were historic. It marked the first direct U.S.-Iran meeting in more than a decade and the highest level discussions since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. For now, it does not appear that either side is closing the door on continuing contacts toward reaching an agreement, with ample time remaining in the two-week ceasefire.
And as the direct talks were underway between the U.S. and Iran in Islamabad, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addressed the nation, saying the campaign against Iran is not over. Referring to a map of the region during his video statement, Netanyahu said Israel had dealt a major blow to Iran's capabilities, but warned that more action may still be required. The Prime Minister said Israel had broken the barrier of fear by directly targeting Iran, adding, "We hit them, we still have more to do." The comments highlight growing political debate in Israel over the outcome of the war, even as the ceasefire remains in place and stated war goals have yet to be achieved. Netanyahu claimed that without the joint Israeli and U.S. strikes, Iran would have already developed a nuclear weapon.
אבל כל זה קרה כי אנחנו יזמנו, אנחנו פעלנו, אנחנו תקפנו. ולמה יצאנו למערכה? כי איראן הייתה קרובה מאוד להשיג נשק גרעיני ולהשיג יכולת לייצר טילים, אלפים של טילים. לא קומץ טילים ביום שהיו נופלים עלינו, מאות רבות מדי יום. שני איומים קיומיים שהיינו מוכרחים להרחיק מעל ראשנו. אם לא היינו יוצאים לעם כלבי ואחר כך לשאגת הארי, לאיראן כבר היו פצצות אטום. את זה מנענו. ואני אגיד לכם איך מנענו אותו. כי לפני עם כלבי הגיע אליי הפעם מודיעין מדויק בזמן. והוא אמר לנו שאיראן מתחילה לפעול כדי להפוך את האורניום המועשר לנשק גרעיני. וברגע שקיבלנו את המודיעין הזה, יצאנו לפעולה.
And transitioning to the northern front, where Israel continues heavy strikes against Hezbollah across southern Lebanon, as well as an expanded ground incursion into Binat Jabil, the heart of Hezbollah. But the IDF is showing restraint by not striking in Beirut. This as diplomatic pressure builds to pause the fighting. Iran made a halt in Israeli attacks a condition for starting the talks with the U.S. in Islamabad, but the talks got underway as the cross-border fighting continued. More on this from ILTV's Devo Klein.
Israel never paused striking Hezbollah targets over the weekend. The IDF struck more than 200 targets of the terrorist organization Hezbollah in Lebanon in the past 24 hours. The Air Force continues to hit infrastructure of the terrorist organization and to assist the operation of the ground forces operating in southern Lebanon up to the Litani River. In addition, the IDF continues to strike launchers in order to thwart fire toward the citizens of the State of Israel. Shortly after the start of the ceasefire with Iran, Israel carried out some of its most intense strikes of the war, including major airstrikes in Beirut that hit Hezbollah targets and caused significant damage and casualties. Israel is now limiting its airstrikes in the capital. The shift comes as global criticism has intensified over strikes in densely populated areas of Beirut, with international bodies warning of high civilian casualties and the risk of undermining diplomatic efforts. Israel says Hezbollah wants a ceasefire to cut its losses.
ארגון הטרור חיזבאללה משווע להפסקת אש, וגם פטרוניו האיראנים לוחצים ומאיימים מחשש כבד שישראל תרסק את החיזבאללה.
Israel continues to make clear it is not halting its campaign against Hezbollah and continues strikes in southern Lebanon, the Bekaa Valley, and other areas where the group operates. The Air Force struck 10 rocket launchers in southern Lebanon, which the IDF says were used in recent attacks on northern Israel, with operations continuing to target additional launch infrastructure. In Beit Jabil, in southern Lebanon, IDF Chief Eyal Zamir said the main combat arena is now Lebanon's discussion. Zamir said the objective is the removal of the direct threat to communities in northern Israel and approved new operational plans for the campaign against the terror group. Defense Minister Katz explained the importance of keeping the Iranian and Hezbollah arenas separated.
הסיכום על הפרדת הזירות הוא הישג חשוב שהוביל ראש הממשלה ומאפשר לנו לפעול בעוצמה נגד החיזבאללה לפי תוכנית סדורה שמבוססת על 4 קווים. קו הגבול כולל הרס הבתים בכפרי המגע הלבנונים, קו המגננים בתוך לבנון שהורחב מ5 ל-15 נקודות, קו הנ"ט שתפיסתו הושלמה באמצעות התמרון הקרקעי ופועלים כרגע להרחבתו בנקודות נוספות, וקו הליטני שבו צה"ל ישלוט כחלק מהשליטה במרחב הליטני וימנע חדירת מחבלים נוספים וחזרת תושבים דרומה.
And ahead of a planned meeting on Tuesday aimed at diffusing the continuing Israeli attacks and Hezbollah rocket fire, direct talks took place over the weekend between the Israeli and Lebanese ambassadors to the United States. After Israel's ambassador to the United States, Yechiel Leiter, spoke to the Lebanese ambassador. Leiter said Jerusalem had agreed to enter negotiations but will continue military operations, stressing that Hezbollah remains the primary obstacle to peace. The talks are due to be held at the U.S. State Department and will include representatives from Israel, Lebanon, and the United States in what will be the first direct high-level contact between the sides. The development comes amid reported pressure from Washington for Israel to scale back its strikes and agree to a ceasefire as a confidence-building step. Amid the reported talks, Hezbollah leader Naim Qassem has demanded the government in Beirut not to make concessions, warning against any agreement that would require the group to disarm. Prime Minister Netanyahu made clear Israel is not prepared to discuss a truce while Hezbollah continues rocket attacks on northern communities, though Netanyahu said he views the contacts in Washington as a pathway to a future peace agreement.
אני מבקש לומר לכם, אין הפסקת אש בלבנון. אנחנו ממשיכים להכות בעוצמה את חיזבאללה, ואנחנו לא נעצור עד שנחזיר לכם את הביטחון. לאחר פניות חוזרות ונשנות של ממשלת לבנון לפתוח איתנו במשא ומתן לשלום, אני הנחיתי אמש בקבינט לפתוח במשא ומתן ישיר עם לבנון כדי להשיג 2 יעדים. 1, פירוק חיזבאללה מנשקו, והשני, הסכם שלום היסטורי בר קיימא בין ישראל ללבנון.
And joining us now with more on the latest developments in the Middle East is Colonel Richard Outzen, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So right now, there is a very fragile ceasefire still in place between the United States, Israel, and Iran. But on the other hand, the talks have failed, and the Islamic Republic of Iran is not willing to give in to U.S. demands and stop its pursuit of nuclear weapons. There's also disagreement over the Strait of Hormuz. So what happens now?
Well, I think Trump's still negotiating, but unlike some other previous U.S. presidents, his is not the paradigm where you talk, fight, fight, fight. I think the interspersing of talk, fight is more the way business is done in the Middle East, and it is more Trump style as well. So I think he will prepare. He's already brought more military assets into the region. Vice President Vance, who was leading the delegation to Islamabad from the U.S. side, made very clear that there is no wiggle room on the nuclearization, right? So the United States until it has clear and unambiguous proof and safeguards that there will be no nuclear weapons program and no intention and no precursors, then there's no deal. In the meantime, the second part of this, in addition to just preparing the ground for more military action against the military infrastructure in Iran, is going to be the Strait of Hormuz. I think what we're going to see is the preparation that we've seen the initial steps already of sort of a naval flotilla led by the United States, potentially with some other allies, to provide safe passage through an alternate route through the Straits of Hormuz. Straits of Hormuz are pretty big, and frankly, the Iranians don't have absolute control of it. So I think you'll see more steps from the United States to guarantee passage. And when those two things are happening, more military pressure and more steps to open the Straits of Hormuz by force, then I think you'll see the negotiating leverage of the Iranians deteriorate further, and then perhaps they'll come to an agreement.
So U.S. President Trump has floated this idea of a naval blockade on the Strait of Hormuz, or a flotilla, as you just said. I mean, what can you tell us about this option, mainly from a strategic and military perspective?
Well, from a military perspective, it's a fairly straightforward task, and it's actually one we've done a version of back in the 1980s, because during the Iran-Iraq war in the 1980s, the Iranians were attacking tankers out of the perception that the international community was supporting Iraq, Saddam Hussein's Iraq at the time. So they flagged certain of the commercial carriers, mostly oil, with sort of Western flags. They declared them national assets of the various U.S. and allied navies, and then they protected them. So I think it's a fairly straightforward operational task, which is, that doesn't mean it's easy, but it's fairly simple, which is to identify a route and advertise to those ships that might be held up, especially those from Gulf allies like Kuwait and Qatar, and then either escort them or ensure that there are constant patrols along that route that will keep Iranian speedboats and sea mines rather from there. So that's the operational impact. The strategic impact, the hard task here is making sure it's not just the U.S. operation. The U.S. Navy is the largest and most powerful in the world. But to be honest with you, this operation has much more strength if it's a broader coalition. So the strategic impact of all of that will be to demonstrate that Iran really doesn't have much leverage and to broaden the coalition of countries pressuring Iran to make a deal.
And addressing Lebanon as well, it was very notable that Hezbollah was not included in the ceasefire agreement, despite Iranian attempts to try and save its terror proxy. Now, Israel is continuing strikes against terror targets in Lebanon, and talks are supposed to get underway this week. But, we've already been in this scenario before. A ceasefire was in place. Hezbollah broke it yet again when it joined the war on behalf of Iran. The Lebanese government has proven unwilling or incapable of dismantling Hezbollah. So what has changed now?
Yeah, so I have a lot of friends who follow Lebanon very carefully, and I do as well. It's one of those situations where the same mistakes seem to be made again and again, and there's not a lot of good options strategically. It's not as if the option of a drive on Beirut, again, to sort of remove the Hezbollah control from the southern suburbs or something like that's in the cards. So my friends in Israel used to refer to this cycle as setting the rules of the game, right? So there's a certain game played between Hezbollah and Israel, and the Lebanese government, in some sense, is an observer in that. You can't force the Lebanese government to exercise sovereignty if they don't think they have it, and they don't have the military superiority even over Hezbollah. So the rules of the game then become provocation and punishment. And Hezbollah has to be punished equal to the amount of provocation that it's engaged in. It is unfortunately a sideshow that's linked to, but not resolvable through the same mechanism as the broader fight with Iran. This is one place where if there were regime change in Tehran, it would absolutely be in the strategic interest of Israel and Lebanon as well as in Iran, because without that external support, Hezbollah cannot challenge the state. Unfortunately, that they are still the strongest actor, or at least the most willing actor to employ force in Lebanon.
All right, well, Colonel Rich Outzen, thank you so much for joining us today and updating us on all the latest developments. Never a dull moment here in the Middle East. Thank you so much.
Have a good day. Thank you.
The University of Haifa stands at the forefront of global impact, ranking #1 in Israel, and has been ranked among the top 100 universities worldwide for sustainability. Here, environmental responsibility, social justice, and academic research come together to build a better future.
Haifa International also has adopted the sustainability perspective, where we take part also in high-impact work that is informed by academic research to ensure that we have a better world to live in.
From marine research in the Mediterranean to community-focused programs shaping peace and equality, students engage directly with the issues that matter.
It's not just a degree, it's an experience, and it opens your mind, your network, and your world.
Study where innovation meets purpose on a campus committed to progress, diversity, and global citizenship. Master your mind, live your Israel experience. Shape a sustainable future at Haifa International. And meanwhile, over the past 24 hours, more than 40 rockets were fired from Lebanon into northern Israel, triggering repeated air raid sirens in Safed, Nahariya, Carmiel, across the Galilee and border communities. Some projectiles were intercepted while others landed in open areas. A building was damaged in the town of Shlomi, but no injuries were reported. Earlier on the weekend, Hezbollah fired toward the southern port city of Ashdod, one of the deepest strikes attempted by Hezbollah in the current conflict. The missile was intercepted with no injuries reported, but debris from the interception triggered sirens in Tel Aviv and surrounding areas. A rocket from Lebanon also struck a home in Misgav Am, causing damage but no casualties in Kiryat Shmona. A direct hit was reported on a residential structure. No injuries were reported there. And in Nahariya, a rocket hit a sports facility, damaging a building. And also in Nahariya, the archaeological site of a Byzantine church was struck, leaving some minor damage. The site is 1,500 years old and houses a mosaic floor that is 450 square meters. The structure shielding the mosaic sustained some damage.
And about 70% of the mosaic is still original from 630 AC, 530 AC. And what we have here is a very beautiful site that not very known in Israel, but we hope it will come in.
And amid the ceasefire, the full scale of the 40-day war with Iran is now being fully assessed, with new data revealing the human cost and the extent of the military campaign.
Iran launched approximately 650 ballistic missiles at Israel over the course of the war. 24 people were killed, all civilians, including 20 in Israel and 4 in Judea and Samaria. Most were outside protected shelters when they were hit. More than 7,000 people were wounded, and over 5,500 were forced from their homes due to damage caused by the strikes. The attacks included at least 16 conventional missiles that struck populated areas, as well as dozens of cluster munitions that scattered explosives over wide areas, causing extensive damage to homes and infrastructure. On the military side, the Israeli Air Force, in coordination with the United States, carried out an unprecedented air campaign against the Islamic regime. More than 10,800 Israeli airstrikes were conducted on over 4,000 targets, including missile launchers, air defense systems, nuclear facilities, command centers, and military production sites. The Israeli Air Force flew some 8,500 sorties into Iran, while the United States military carried out an estimated 13,000 strikes during the operation. According to the IDF, about 60% of the Iran ballistic missile launchers were destroyed or disabled, with many subsequently rendered inoperable throughout damage to underground infrastructure. Before the war, Iran was estimated to hold around 2,500 ballistic missiles. Current assessments suggest about 1,000 remain capable of reaching Israel. The campaign also dealt a severe blow to Iran's weapons production systems, with Israel saying it has disrupted the ability to produce new missiles. On the nuclear front, Iran is still believed to hold more than 4,000 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium, enough for up to 11 nuclear bombs, some of which is thought to be hidden or buried underground. In the final stages of the war, Israel expanded strikes to Iran's economic infrastructure, including gas fields, steel plants, petrochemical sites, and key rail and bridge networks. Israel said these targets were linked to military logistics and weapons productions, but also served to increase economic pressure on the Iranian regime. The campaign also targeted Iran's military leadership, with dozens of senior commanders killed and thousands of Iranian soldiers reportedly wounded or also eliminated. Israeli officials say the operation met and in some cases exceeded its objectives, significantly reducing Iran's military capabilities. However, despite the ceasefire, officials warn the situation remains fragile, with the possibility of renewed fighting still very much on the table.
The outcome is seen as critical, with Gaza's reconstruction or a potential return to war dependent on any deal. But for now, uncertainty remains as the talks continue. And the Security Cabinet has approved the establishment of 34 new Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria, in what is being described as the largest single approval of settlements by any Israeli government to date. The decision, taken in a classified meeting, includes both brand new communities and outposts that will be retroactively legalized. The move brings the total number of settlements approved by the current government since 2022 to 103. Marking a significant expansion of Israeli presence in Judea and Samaria. The new sites are located in isolated areas of northern Samaria, including near Palestinian population centers, but they are still within Area C, which is under full Israeli security control. The decision has been drawing strong international opposition and places additional strain on Israeli security forces. The government is defending the move as part of a long-term strategic plan to strengthen and expand its presence in Judea and Samaria. And bouncing back quickly after major disruptions from February 28th, Ben Gurion Airport has fully reopened. But travelers are facing limited options and sharply higher airfares. Rising jet fuel prices linked to the regional broader conflict are also pushing airfares higher. Israeli airlines El Al, Kia, and Isla Air are ramping up operations, adding flights and seats to meet surging demand, as many Israelis plan spring and summer travel. Most foreign carriers are still not back as they wait to see whether the current ceasefire will hold. But a few foreign airlines are now beginning a gradual return to Israel. And now let's take a look at the weather forecast. Cloudy skies are expected around most of the country tonight, with temperatures reaching lows of 12 degrees Celsius or 54 degrees Fahrenheit. Then tomorrow we'll see partly cloudy skies alongside steady temperatures with highs of 21 degrees Celsius or 70 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's a wrap for today's news. For the latest updates from Israel on all your devices, be sure to follow our ILTV channels and keep up with us on social media. That's at ILTV_Israel on all platforms. You can also catch us on Screen IL with 24/7 live coverage. Stay informed with the latest news straight from the heart of Israel. I'm Madar Gavelazi. Be well, and thank you so much for watching.
Welcome back to Axis of Truth. Well, the media is at it again, determined to show the United States is a big loser, when in fact it's the opposite. And I'm really fed up with the America bashing taking place amongst the journalistic elite, because it's actively aiding the Islamic regime at a time of war. Anything, literally anything that could vindicate President Trump's claims, the media ignores, from the regime recruiting 12-year-olds to importing foreign terror proxy groups to Iran. Yet anything, literally anything, including made-up stories that make Trump look bad, weeks of non-stop coverage. Blatant, pathetic, and ignorant. Let's walk through this week. And boy, has it been a whopper for the media. First off, Alex Crawford from Sky News. Now, she was my scumbag last week on the Quad, which you should check out on JNS, but she's doubled down since then on her terrible coverage. Yes, this is the same Alex Crawford who now famously broadcast from an official Hezbollah funeral of slain operatives who cosplayed as journalists and got killed. Alex claimed there was no evidence that alleged journalists Ali Shuaib and Mohammed Fatouni were Hezbollah, yet at the funeral itself, she's on camera where Hezbollah flags are prominently visible. Take a look.
We're at a temporary graveyard in Beirut where the 3 journalists who were killed in a targeted attack by the Israeli military are being buried. There are, you can see, quite a large number of graves, all for people who have been killed since the beginning of March, who cannot be buried near their homes and villages because of the ongoing Israeli invasion.
If that's not enough, there are literally photos of Ali Shuaib in fatigues and Mohammed Fatouni in uniform with the Hezbollah flag. This is basic, and yet it's being ignored in real time in order to maintain a narrative that Israel targeted journalists. Even more ridiculous, a few days later, Alex reported from Lebanon that Israel was ethnically cleansing Lebanon by telling Christian villages in the south not to allow in Muslims who were told to evacuate. Not only is this false, it's a complete misrepresentation of what is actually happening on the ground. There was no order targeting Muslims because they are Muslim. There were evacuation notices in southern Lebanon in areas where Hezbollah is operating, areas where they store weapons, launch attacks, and embed themselves within civilian populations. This is why the IDF instructed Christian villages nearby not to allow in Hezbollah operatives, to allow them to use those communities, not because they're Muslim. I remind you, Alex, that under UN Resolution 1559 and 1701, Hezbollah isn't allowed to be in that area. They're not allowed to be armed. This was also reaffirmed in the ceasefire, which they violated repeatedly. This is not Israel's interpretation. It's the international community's standard. And incidentally, Alex, the same Christian communities are being used in this story are communities that have been persecuted by the PLO in the past and by Hezbollah today, which makes the framing even more absurd. What's being presented as a religious or ethnic issue in reality is a security issue involving illegal armed groups operating in direct violation of international resolutions. Also, incidentally, they're a terror proxy of the regime, which is occupying a sovereign nation, Lebanon. But it wasn't just Alex. The entire media seemed to lose their mind this week over striking bridges, as if targeting infrastructure used by an army is somehow illegal. Whether it's wise or necessary is an entirely different discussion, but it's not and has never been illegal. Bridges are used for movement of weapons, for troops, for logistics, and striking them is standard military practice in any conventional conflict. There is nothing remotely controversial about it in military terms, and yet the way it was covered in the media, you'd think that something unprecedented had happened. Again, this comes down to framing, because if you present basic military targeting as a scandal, you turn, or can turn, any normal and necessary operation into a moral indictment. And this disinformation campaign continued with Christiane Amanpour on CNN, who invited Gary Sick this week to comment on the Iran war. Since the war began, Amanpour has had a plethora of guests who are coincidentally aligned in their ideology with whatever position helps preserve the Islamic regime. Gary Sick is no different. This is someone who created an entire network of academics and policy figures focused on reducing pressure on the Islamic Republic in 2010. And who has been connected to initiatives funded by Plowshares. A Soros-funded project also funds NIAC, the de facto lobby of the regime in the United States. Plowshares also played a significant role during the Obama era in promoting the Iran deal. So this isn't a neutral voice being brought in for balance. This is a very specific perspective that is consistently platformed, and one that Christiane seems to agree with. You see this same pattern in the missile launcher story which CNN broke this week in one of the most ridiculous spins of the war so far. A U.S. source said that about 50% of Iran's missile launchers have been destroyed after 5 weeks of war, which by any serious military standard is a significant degradation of capability in a very short time frame. The story was then twisted into a debate over the fact that Israel previously claimed 70% of launchers had been eliminated as of a few weeks ago, but they are also considering launchers which were corked, aka buried, under the rubble in bases where strikes have completely destroyed the area. But the regime has succeeded in recent days in recovering many of them from that rubble. Somehow, in the minds of CNN, all of this gets presented as indicative of failure, and even worse, that Israel misled the U.S., as if 50% isn't enough. Really? Moving on to the New York Times, who also had their share of embarrassments this week, they decided to run an article by Ali Vez titled "Trump Has Lost Control of the War." Now, Ali is a known propagandist for the Islamic regime. If you want to understand what the regime wants American audiences to think about this war, you can read anything he says, or you can read Treated Parsi, same thing. And you'll see the same exact themes repeated. The regime is moderate, Trump is dangerous, Israel's to blame, and look how evil the West is. Every time. But apparently the New York Times doesn't care about that, because these are not random analysts being pulled in for diversity of viewpoints or their profound understanding of the issues. No, these are consistently aligned voices that reinforce a particular line that actively helps the regime. And somehow this week it got even worse, because after the F-15 was downed and while U.S. and Israeli forces were actively trying to extract the pilots, drop site news, another partially funded Soros project, which shills for Hamas, implied that the United States might actually kill its own pilot at this point, and like clockwork, Joe Kent, the regime's new favorite American traitor, amplified it. For the third week in a row, the same question: who the hell is paying Joe Kent? Because this level of disinformation doesn't just appear out of nowhere. And in general, I have to say, the moment the news broke that a U.S. plane had been downed, the international media had a field day. Suddenly, every story is about how unsuccessful the war has been and how Trump is failing. Check out this absurdity from Sky News.
American aircraft down over Iran, a risky rescue operation, and a sequence of events which undermines what the US president and his team have been saying. So what does all this tell us? Well, I think it tells us that the president and his team are wrong when they say things like this.
They have no anti-aircraft equipment. Their radar is 100% annihilated. We are unstoppable as a military force.
Or this.
We've achieved dominance over the skies of Iran.
ABC News in Australia had a similar sentiment. And why? This is such garbage, because when we talk about failures in this war, we're looking at more than 15,000 combat missions in 5 weeks with 0 casualties and 1 major incident of a fighter jet being downed. Even that resulted in 0 casualties. That is a 0.006% issue rate. And the mainstream media want to frame this as a failure? If this is a failure, I hope the United States always fails so well. And at the same time, there are actual stories that could be covered, including Hezbollah firing missiles that have hit UNIFIL staff and injured them, which you would think would be a major international story. And yet it's barely mentioned, despite the fact that there are reporters like Alex Crawford on the ground in Lebanon. What we're seeing from these people is dishonest. It's not journalism, and it has to stop. Now, this next story is exposing something that a lot of Americans are not aware of. We speak all the time about how the Islamic regime uses proxies abroad, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen. That's well known. But what's not discussed enough is that the regime uses proxies internally inside Iran against the Iranian people. And right now, there's really concerning evidence from inside Iran that this is happening again. And if you know history, you know exactly what that signals. Over the past several days, we've seen footage and reports of Iraqi Popular Mobilization Forces, or Hashd al-Shabi, entering Iranian territory in large convoys, hundreds of vehicles crossing through the border under the cover of aid. These are IRGC-aligned terror proxy groups that have spent years targeting American forces in Iraq with rocket attacks, IEDs, and base strikes. That is the network now moving into Iran at scale. And it doesn't stop with Iraqi militias. We're also seeing the Fatimiyun, an Afghan proxy terror force created, trained, and deployed by the IRGC, with thousands of fighters reportedly brought into Iran in recent days. These are the same forces that fought in Syria under IRGC command, used as a front line for infantry in some of the most brutal operations of the war. This week, they've been featured at pro-regime rallies where the regime attempts to show that they have support or legitimacy amongst the people who, in reality, aren't even Iranian and don't speak Farsi. Meanwhile, alongside them, the Zainabiyun Brigade, a Pakistani IRGC proxy, has also been documented inside Iran, including participating in those same regime-organized rallies that are then broadcast as evidence of popular support. Now, during previous waves of protests, including the most recent, there were repeated reports from inside Iran of non-Persian-speaking forces on the ground, of Iraqi militias deployed into certain provinces, and of Afghan and Pakistani fighters operating alongside the IRGC and besieged during crackdowns. People reported hearing Arabic frequently. They also reported seeing forces that were clearly not local during those crackdowns. Thousands of Iranians killed in a matter of days with live ammunition used against unarmed protesters, including machine gun fire, alongside mass arrests and disappearances. This is how the regime has responded when it feels its control is slipping. So when you see a foreign militia entering Iran now during a war, during a period of immense pressure and internal stability, this lines up with a known playbook. And there's another layer to this that makes it even more serious. At the same time that these militias are entering Iran, there are also reports that China has been supplying the regime with materials used for ballistic missile fuel, including chemical components for rocket propellant that have already arrived by ship. So you have foreign support coming in through supply chains, and you have foreign militias coming in on the ground, with these developments happening in parallel. When you put them together, you see a regime preparing on multiple fronts, externally and internally, while relying on forces that have no connection to their own population they may be deployed against. For Iranians watching this unfold, it isn't abstract. They've seen it before, they recognize this pattern, and they know what these groups have done in the past. Now, the U.S. and Israel must pay close attention to this threat and act decisively to shut down the transfer of proxy terror groups into Iran for the sake of everyone involved. And while the regime is importing foreign militias into Iran and preparing on those multiple fronts, we're also seeing their allies and ideological networks lashing out across the region. Which brings us to the good, the bad, and the ugly. First off, the ugly. This week we saw Islamist pro-Palestinian rioters attack the UAE embassy in Damascus, vandalizing the building, spraying graffiti, waving flags, and turning a diplomatic mission into a target. The UAE condemned the incident as vandalism and a direct assault on its diplomatic presence, and rightfully so, because this wasn't some random protest that got out of hand. It's part of a broader pattern of incitement that's coming from both the Islamic regime in Iran and the Sunni Muslim Brotherhood terror networks, as well as other extremist elements that are trying to destabilize actors in the region that are aligned against them. Take a look at what this actually looked like. What you see here isn't spontaneous, it's targeted. And the United Arab Emirates has taken a clear position against extremism, even banning the Muslim Brotherhood, and in favor of regional stability, including normalization with Israel, as well as cooperation with the United States. That puts them directly in the crosshairs of these networks. And the timing here isn't coincidental. It's happening as the regime is under incredible pressure, and its proxy networks are also taking hits across the region. When that happens, these groups start looking for ways to create chaos and send a message that any country working with the United States or with Israel or anyone against extremist ideology can be targeted. When you step back, you see a shift happening. UAE, Israel, United States, Ukraine, most of Eastern Europe, a large portion of the Gulf, they're all moving in the same direction against extremist networks, both Muslim Brotherhood aligned and IRGC backed. And when that realignment starts to take shape, these networks panic. They target embassies, they create instabilities, and they try to reassert relevance. But what it actually shows is that this pressure is working, and the response should be to keep it there. Now, for the bad story of the week, and this one shows you exactly how the Islamic Republic operates through its official channels. This week, the regime's embassy in South Africa posted an explicitly anti-Semitic image on its official account, an image showing a rat wearing a kippah riding and controlling the American bald eagle, a direct visual claim that Jews control the United States. It's not subtle, and it's not new. It's a classic anti-Semitic conspiracy trope with roots in Nazi propaganda, where Jews were depicted as rats to dehumanize them and justify violence against them. It's also exactly the kind of imagery covered in the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, which specifically includes claims that Jews control governments or global systems, as well as the use of dehumanizing symbols like rats to represent Jews. But in South Africa, it's more than an issue of being offended. It's actually a legal issue. South Africa's constitution literally prohibits advocacy of hatred based on religion or ethnicity that constitutes incitement to harm. It's a constitutional standard, and what the Islamic Republic's embassy posted falls directly into that category because it's not a criticism of policy, it's a dehumanization of people. So the question here is very simple. Why is a foreign government embassy being allowed to operate on South African soil while openly violating that standard? A formal complaint has already been filed calling for accountability, and that is exactly what should happen because this isn't about one post. It's about whether South Africa is going to apply its own laws consistently. Now, we've already seen South Africa expel diplomats over far less, and they've done it before when they claimed diplomatic norms were violated. So why the double standard here? Sadly, I think we know the answer. South Africa is in bed with the Islamic regime, regardless of the fact that the Islamic Republic's values are in direct contradiction of the South African Constitution. The South African government has cooperated closely with terrorists and even has a Hamas office in Cape Town. Its officials frequently speak with and visit Iran, and they praise the regime even when the regime slaughters protesters en masse. If South Africa were serious about its constitution, it would respond not only with a statement, but with an action. The Islamic regime shouldn't be allowed to use its embassy as a platform to spread blatant anti-Semitic incitement. And yes, that means expulsion of the ambassador and the regime's diplomatic presence. Because it's not an isolated incident. This is how the regime operates, and this is who they are. Believe them. Otherwise, if there are no consequences for such conduct, it will not only continue, but it will expand. And finally, the good, and this one is extraordinary because if you want to see what actual capability and allied military coordination look like in practice, this is it. This week, the U.S., with support from Israel, executed one of the most complex rescue operations in recent history after an F-15 was down deep inside Iranian territory, leaving 2 crew members stranded behind enemy lines. Now, the pilot was extracted first, but the navigator remained on the ground for nearly 2 days, injured, moving through mountainous terrain while regime forces were actively trying to locate him. The operation that followed was a full-spectrum effort. Hundreds of special operations forces, dozens of aircraft and helicopters, MQ-9 Reaper drones overhead, and a constant stream of intelligence from air, cyber, and space-based assets working to locate, track, and protect one man on the ground in difficult terrain that complicated both movement and extraction. The CIA also ran a deception campaign inside Iran, pushing false information that the navigator had already been located and moved, delaying the Iranian response, while U.S. forces were still working to reach him. Now, at the same time, U.S. intel was able to pinpoint his location despite the conditions, allowing operators to move with precision. Meanwhile, IRGC forces moved towards the area. MQ-9 drones engaged them, striking units that approached the navigator and preventing them from reaching his position. This was active control of the battle space inside Iranian territory. Israeli intel also played a role during the operation, including support that helped counter Iranian air activity over the course of approximately 36 hours that this rescue mission was underway. The area where the navigator landed is also known for being extremely hostile to the regime, and according to reports and footage, local Iranians also gathered and blocked roads leading up the mountain, which slowed IRGC forces that were trying to reach the site. While U.S. forces were moving in, regime units were being delayed on the ground. Special operations forces were inserted roughly 250 kilometers from the nearest friendly border using MC-130J aircraft designed for operations behind enemy lines. But during the extraction, 2 of those aircraft encountered problems on the ground due to land conditions and were unable to take off. Ultimately, the decision was made to destroy them in place to prevent any intel or technology from falling into the regime's hands. The rescue crew and the injured navigator waited for additional aircraft at immense risk to themselves, and they were able to complete the extraction in the end. This is simply historic and should fill every American and every Israeli with pride. It was a multi-day mission inside of Iranian territory involving hundreds of personnel, multiple aircraft, active engagement with regime forces, a live deception campaign, allied intel support, and local resistance to the regime on the ground. And the result is that both crew members were extracted and every single U.S. service member made it out with 0 casualties. My favorite part, however, is how the Islamic Republic state media released images after the fact and footage of the destroyed aircraft as if this was somehow a success for them, instead of the obvious humiliation that it is. They don't even control their own skies, and they're so incompetent that they tried to create propaganda from the very site where the United States destroyed their own planes. After the U.S. and Israeli forces operated inside Iran and completed the mission without a single casualty. Embarrassing. In any case, I'm extremely proud of all of our soldiers, the American soldiers and the IDF, that courageously did what needed to be done. That is what success looks like, no matter how angry that makes CNN and Sky News to admit it. And with that, we finish for the week, but we'll be back next week with more stories you're not hearing anywhere else and everything that you need to make sense of what's actually happening in the Iran war. You can also follow our JNS coverage for continuing reporting and analysis. And as always, if you think there's a story we should be covering, you can reach me on social media at Emily K. Schrader or on Instagram, Emily in Tel Aviv. Until next time, see you on Axis of Truth on JNS. As war continues across Israel, thousands of workers will receive only partial paychecks before Passover. 5,000 families are currently on the waiting list for a Passover food basket from Yad Ezra v'Shulamit, Israel's largest distributor of food baskets to the poor in Israel. Joining us now is Yad Ezra v'Shulamit Resource Manager Danny Gewirtz to give us the inside scoop on what's happening today. Danny, thank you for joining us. Right now, we're just a few days before Passover. I want to ask you, what are you witnessing in terms of how this war is impacting Israeli families?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. Good to be here. When war surges, it doesn't just hit the front lines, it drains the lifeline of organizations like ours. I think what we're seeing here right now, Emily, is what I call the perfect storm. As you mentioned, it's right before Pesach, so the timing really couldn't be worse. We have a war, there's less funds available. Many organizations are fighting for that piece of pie that's out there to give to organizations like ours. The shekel dollar rate is killing us, as many of our donors have found out. People aren't working also. People, of course, are at home. They're home with their kids. Our fundraisers, who should be out in the out in the States right now have been basically grounded. The local telemarketers haven't been able to go to work. I should be out there going and talking to major donors. It's heartbreaking, really, what's going on, because we're struggling to even reach the 60,000 food baskets, which every year we're committed to giving. And as you mentioned, we have 5,000 families on a waiting list that don't know if they will even have the assistance that Yad Hazav Shulamit gives them, and that they depend on every single year.
Who's being hit hardest by this war that you've seen so far?
Well, it's hardworking families, families with lots of children, the elderly, Holocaust victims, anyone who depends really on Yad Hazav Shulamit for their basic needs, for that food basket that comes to them. And it's just been very, very tough. It's basically just people who depend on us for food.
Those who are really in need right now. I do want to ask you, I mean, given the unique circumstances, you spoke a bit about it, but how does the fundraising this year compare to previous years?
Well, as I mentioned, the fundraisers have basically been grounded, as you can't leave the country. The telemarketers are basically at work, so they haven't been hitting the phones. And it's really created a shortfall in our ability to meet that commitment of 60,000 food baskets. We have 5,000 people on a waiting list, and I'm imploring people or challenging them to take the food basket challenge, as the jargon goes here today, to go out there, and if everyone who's watching will take on a food basket or two, it'll really help narrow the gap of where we would like to be. So there's a saying in the Haggadah, I'm sure you're familiar with it, halach manya, let them come and eat. And that's a call for everyone to host people into their houses, to give people to eat. It's hard to do, obviously, but people can really actually do that before and go and donate a food basket and make sure that people who depend on us have what to eat. The holiday is so expensive. I'm sure you realize food prices have been soaring for years. But Passover always sees an increase in those food prices. And people can help if they just want to. They can go out and they can scan the code there, and they can actually give a food basket to a needy family in Israel, a poor, needy family. These are the vulnerable people who are really feeling the effects of the war. But the audience, your audience, can go out there and make a difference.
Absolutely. I think the need is perhaps greater than it has been for quite some time. The last 2 years in general has been difficult, but definitely right now a challenging time. Thank you so much for all the work that you're doing and for joining us today, Danny.
Thank you very much.
As Israel prepares for Passover, the holiday is unfolding under the shadow of war. Nearly 1.5 million people are living with food insecurity, as thousands of families are displaced, and many still don't know where they'll sit down for Seder night. Since the war began, Leket Israel has distributed more than 2,000 tons of produce and tens of thousands of meals. Let's take a closer look.
Hi, it's Joseph Gittler, founder and chairman of Leket Israel. Today I'm in Kiryat Sharet, where a food distribution to those in need is about to happen. One of the Leket truck just showed up with an entirely full truck of a wide range of produce. We're now in the 4th week of the war. There are volunteers here helping out in order to do this distribution, which is going to happen very, very soon. I just spoke with the manager of this organization, and she told me she has extra demand this year. That is, of course, a repercussion of the ongoing war. We're 1 week before Pesach, nearly 4 weeks into the war. A lot of people have been laid off, unfortunately. A lot of businesses are suffering. And of course, those who suffer most are those in need. Prices, not surprisingly, because of the situation, have also started to creep up. So we're doing the best on our ability to provide as much fruits and vegetables and cooked meals and all other types of items to people in need for this Pesach.
I know Leket 70 years, and there is like a family for me and for all the people who take it, the vegetable and the fruit, and they do big, big things for the other people who need it. And we believe that if you give to somebody, the God give you back.
People talk about farm to table. What could be nicer than giving the needy this high quality stuff? This literally came from a farm in the last 24 hours, and now it's going to make its way to someone's Seder table. Today, we'll have about 300 families that will be coming to this site to pick up produce in order to make sure that their Seder table looks like so many of ours. Look at these onions, as good as you can buy in any store, the finest stores in the land will stock these onions. There's a bit of overproduction right now. Prices have dropped, and so farmers have been generous enough for the holiday to donate massive amounts of onions to Lakehed. And we are proud that we will distribute them to over 400,000 needy Israelis between now and the Passover holiday. We're making an extra push this year before Pesach because of the demand and because we want to give people respect when they come to their Seder table. But it's important to note, we don't view ourselves at Lakehed as an emergency food distribution organization. We're a food distribution organization every day of the year. But now, in a time of war, in a time of emergency, in a time of extra demand, we will do whatever it takes to make sure that those who count on us get what they need. So I hope those who see this can help out, come to our rescue, and make sure that no matter how long this war continues, we'll be able to do what we need to do.
ILTV News, your source for Israel in English. Reporting from the ground where it happens, as it happens. An authentic, trusted voice in daily Israel news. Airing on 11 international TV channels and now launching a 24/7 Israeli news channel. Reaching millions every month across all social platforms. Independent, real, powered by truth. We don't just report, we connect. Thanks to a worldwide community that stands for truth. This is ILTV, your source for Israel in English.
Welcome to ILTV on the Hour. I'm Sivan Raviv, coming to you live from Israel with all the biggest headlines from across the region. Let's recap all of the latest developments. U.S. President Donald Trump says the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz announced yesterday is set to take effect today at 5 p.m. Israel time, just hours from now. Trump says he has ordered U.S. Central Command to block all vessels headed to and from Iranian ports. At the same time, he said the ceasefire with Iran is holding well and expressed hope that Tehran could still return to the negotiating table. Let's take a listen to Trump.
That a lot of very good things are happening with regard to the Strait, Hormuz, and a lot of good things are happening for our country. It's been very strong. I would say it's holding well. Their military is destroyed. 10 o'clock tomorrow, we have a blockade going into effect. That'll be 10 o'clock tomorrow. Other nations are working so that Iran will not be able to sell oil. What we notice and what we see and what I think is maybe my idea, maybe not, I don't know, but there are many boats heading toward our country to fill up with oil and then go and take it. So they're not going to go through the Hormuz Strait. And ultimately that'll be corrected.
And as the U.S. imposes a blockade on the Strait of Hormuz, the IDF is preparing for a possible renewed conflict with Iran if there is a sudden collapse of the U.S.-Iran ceasefire. In what appears to be a coordinated leak by defense officials, all major Israeli news outlets report the military is not only increasing readiness, but also preparing for a possible Iranian surprise attack on Israel. A senior defense official is reported saying Israel may be considering renewed pressure on Iran over its nuclear and ballistic missile programs. The IDF alert level has reportedly been significantly raised, with Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir ordering broad combat readiness procedures and preparations for an immediate resumption of fighting. Zamir instructed the military to move to a heightened state of readiness, with all units ordered to maintain high alert amid the collapse of negotiations between the U.S. and Iran. President Trump moved forward with the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz after Iran rejected key U.S. demands in ongoing diplomatic talks. U.S. officials say Tehran has refused to halt uranium enrichment or dismantle core nuclear facilities, central conditions set by Washington. Iran also rejected calls to end support for regional proxy groups and to fully reopen the strait to international shipping. In response, Iran's Revolutionary Guard is warning that any military presence in the area could be seen as a violation of the ceasefire and may trigger a forceful response. The IRGC insists the strait remains under its control and warns that any wrong move by foreign vessels could have serious consequences and they may be trapped in a deadly vortex in the strait. An Israeli ground operation is underway in the southern Lebanese town of Ben Jbeil, a key Hezbollah stronghold, with dozens of operatives surrounded or fleeing. Troops raided a hospital used by Hezbollah, killing around 20 gunmen and seizing weapons after coming under fire from inside. The IDF says the site was used for military purposes. In a separate operation, troops eliminated the cell responsible for killing IDF Golani soldier Staff Sergeant Tuval Yosef Lipschitz earlier this month. And the first direct talks between Israel and Lebanon in decades are set for tomorrow in Washington under American mediation. Israeli Ambassador Yechiel Leiter and Lebanese Ambassador Nada Hamadeh Mouad are due to meet and work toward an agreement between the nations to disarm Hezbollah. The talks come amid ongoing clashes and despite weekend protests by Hezbollah supporters in Lebanon. Regional players, including Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar, are reportedly pressuring Hezbollah-allied Parliament Speaker Nabi Berri to halt the unrest and allow diplomacy to proceed. So far, the protests have failed to gain momentum and have not derailed the talks. Major disagreements remain. Lebanon is demanding a ceasefire before any progress, while Israel insists negotiations can continue alongside military operations. The central obstacle is Hezbollah, with Israel seeking disarmament and security guarantees, and the group flatly rejecting the process. For now, expectations are low, with officials describing the meeting as a first step toward de-escalation rather than an immediate breakthrough. Now that's a wrap for this edition of ILTV on the Hour, broadcasting live from Israel and the heart of the Middle East. I'm Sivan Raviv. Thank you very much for watching.
Today it's Thursday morning in Israel, and we are 24 hours into the ceasefire in the Iran war.
But let's hear what President Trump had to say for all those who were nervous about this, meaning that it's the end of the war and no achievements were made. All U.S. ships, aircraft, and military personnel with additional ammunition, weaponry, and anything else that is appropriate and necessary for the lethal prosecution and destruction of an already substantially degraded enemy will remain in place in and around Iran until such time as the real agreement reached is fully complied with. If for any reason it is not, which is highly unlikely, then the shooting stars, bigger and better and stronger than anyone has ever seen before. It was agreed a long time ago, and despite all of the fake rhetoric to the contrary, no nuclear weapons, and the Strait of Hormuz will be open and safe. In the meantime, our great military is loading up and resting, looking forward, actually, to its next conquest. America is back. So, Mark, sounds like President Trump is saying here, look, we believe that we're reaching an agreement, but you know what? If Iran doesn't comply with every single detail of this agreement or the agreement that is reached within 2 weeks, we're going back in.
So, 100% correct that Trump is saying we're taking a pause. 2 weeks, if the Iranians, from his perspective, negotiate seriously. In other words, if they agree to make serious concessions, they agree to end enrichment, they agree that the already enriched material in Iran will be taken out of the country, that they will limit their nuclear program, and that's what he stressed. There's also the ballistic issue and the issue of the proxies, but they agree to make serious changes, then he says, well, the ceasefire can continue. But if they don't, we're, locked and loaded, right? We're ready to go again. Our forces are still there. They're having a bit of a rest now, but when I give the order, they'll be willing to go. And so basically he's saying, we get a deal we want, what the world needs, or back to war. And the question is, and it's an open question, is the Iranian regime, the Ayatollahs, the Revolutionary Guards, the people who run Iran, are they willing now, because they've been hit so hard over the last 40 days, are they willing to make concessions that they weren't willing to make up till now? And that is an open question.
Let me put it this way. The trouble with all of this, what you're saying, will they agree? Will they uphold their... Of course they won't. Islamist regimes don't uphold anything. The question is here, and why some people got nervous, some people who supported the war got very nervous when President Trump said there was regime change already and that we're now negotiating with the new regime. Now, the Iranian people don't agree with that, and rightly so. If you want to call the Revolutionary Guards and the Besieged militias, those who haven't been killed by the U.S. and Israeli forces, you want to call that a regime change, sorry. These are people who are saying we got to step up executions of protesters or those who protested in the past. This is very, very bad for the Iranian people. And that's why we have to stop saying if the Iranians agree. It's the regime. We don't even know who's heading the regime. We know there's the president who's weak. We know the head of the parliament who's negotiating. The point is, these are evil people, and they are not going to uphold anything. And the only question is, will they be able to pull the wool over Trump's eyes? Now, we know they don't pull the wool over Netanyahu's eyes, but he is going to comply with the United States, and rightly so. And thank God we have to bring up one very crucial point, that when the ceasefire was reported, all the anti-Israel voices and the left in Israel and the Democrats and the Iranian regime and the Pakistani so-called negotiators all came out and said that Lebanon has to be included in this ceasefire. In other words, that Israel has to stop fighting Hezbollah. And guess what? That was a big fat lie. And Israel is continuing to fight Hezbollah. One of the reasons that I calmed down, because I initially believed that we were also going to have to stop fighting Hezbollah in Lebanon.
Well, first of all, you should have read Netanyahu's statement. The minute the ceasefire was declared by Trump, Netanyahu put out a statement, and he said, he supports President Trump, and then, yes, he said a temporary cessation of the offensive action against Iran, and he said, but the operation in Lebanon continues, and I believed him. And yesterday we bombed Hezbollah targets in Lebanon very heavily. And the Iranians are playing games. Yes, they want to, they agree to something and then they immediately pull back. That's the way they've always done it. Yes, and I think it's very good that the United States is standing firm and saying no, Lebanon was not part of the agreement. And if you want to start changing the agreement now, then the ceasefire is, if you don't keep what was agreed to, you've got a problem. And nothing was agreed to that Israel had to stop in Lebanon. There was something from the vice president, who, as you said, is leading the negotiating team in Pakistan. Vance. He said that Israel had agreed not to do anything in Lebanon that would, curtail or upset the negotiations. But I'd remind you, Ruthie, that leading up to the war, Israel was acting against Hezbollah targets in Lebanon before the war broke out, and there's no reason why we can't continue doing that. And I think also in the last few weeks, we've taken over control of a large part of southern Lebanon. We can continue staying there. No one says Israel has to pull out, and Israel can consolidate where we are. I think there's probably more or less, rules of engagement that Israel can live by and help us do what we need to do. The fact remains that I think the pressure has to keep up on Hezbollah. Hezbollah has to keep being, when they're trying to get their head above the parapet, so to speak, we should be able to hit them. And that's what was, once again, that happened before the war. It should happen now. The most important thing is what happens with Iran, because that's the big one, because that also will affect what happens in Lebanon, Ruthie. If we have a good result with Iran, then that immediately affects Hezbollah in Lebanon, because without Iranian support, Hezbollah is nothing.
Well, that's true. But let's just take a step back for a minute. I think a lot of people don't realize or have short memories that, in fact, Israel had signed a ceasefire deal with Lebanon and Hezbollah. In other words, the ceasefire deal was, according to that deal, The Lebanese government and army were going to keep Hezbollah at bay because Israelis who live in northern Israel have no life, okay? They are constantly bombarded by drone and missile fire from Lebanon. And we signed that agreement, and promptly it was violated. And not only violated because the Lebanese government is not only weak in the face of Hezbollah, but by the way, is also hostile to Israel. I know we spent all these years saying, we have no beef with Lebanon, it's only Hezbollah. Well, let's get one thing straight here. First of all, it's not just weakness. Lebanon actually had the nerve to attack us for continuing to defend ourselves while they are bombarding northern Israel, and Israelis there have no time to get to a bomb shelter. You understand, the second a missile is fired from Lebanon, the Israelis have to already be living in their bomb shelters. They have no time to get there. And the north is destroyed. The people are, I have to say, they're very resilient and all that, but their businesses are damaged, and it's been going on now, basically since the October 7th war. I mean, Hezbollah entered on October 8th, 2023, and even after a ceasefire was signed with Lebanon, they continued to be aggressive. And then we said, no more nice guy. That's it, okay? We can't have a ceasefire agreement that means we cease and they fire. But also, I'd like to point out, the Lebanese government said, okay, we're kicking out the Iranian ambassador to Lebanon. And the Iranian ambassador said, no, sorry, not leaving. And they let it go. So they can't even kick out the Iranian ambassador. They're talking to President Trump. They, I mean the Lebanese government, whatever it is trying to persuade President Trump that they're on that side of that axis. And yet they're not doing anything to prevent Hezbollah fire. And what they do when Israel defends itself against those bloodthirsty Iranian proxies is they attack us. Lebanon says we're at fault for this. So I have no sympathy whatsoever for the country of Lebanon at this point. I don't want to hear that statement, well, we have no beef with Lebanon. Yes, we do have a beef with Lebanon.
So my attitude is a little different. I agree with you 100%. The Lebanese government is weak. They can't even, as you said correctly, they can't even throw out the Iranian ambassador after the president and the foreign minister and the prime minister of Lebanon all said he has to leave. They couldn't implement the decision, and that was, how would I say, that was a clear display of their impotence. They don't have the power. They also said as part of the ceasefire agreement, the Lebanese army committed to moving Hezbollah out of all of southern Lebanon. And won't be told, how does the expression go? Israel finds all these Hezbollah people right on our border, and that actually reconstituted some of their power since the last round of fighting. And it happened under the nose of the Lebanese government without the Lebanese government doing anything, right? So it's clear the Lebanese government is weak. And so you can say to me, Mark Regev, you can say, nothing's changed. You can't trust anyone. I would argue that there's also something that has changed, because you've seen rhetoric from the government of Lebanon that you hadn't seen before. The fact that they wanted to throw out the Iranian ambassador, we didn't see that before. The fact that they made the Revolutionary Guards, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards who were in Lebanon, they said they all have to leave and they're illegal. They said that the Hezbollah, in other words, they're saying for the first time, they're saying very strong things. Now, they're not following through. But it's clear to me that Israel has potential friends in Lebanon. The Christian community, the Sunni Muslim community, the Druze community. Now, what's their problem is that they are worried that Hezbollah still has the weapons and that they don't want to take them on. So I would argue, I don't like their rhetoric when they criticize Israel, yes, but I would argue from a diplomatic, realpolitik point of view, that these people would be very happy to see their country rid of Hezbollah, and they can't do it by themselves. So as Israel continues to act against Hezbollah and to degrade Hezbollah's military capabilities, and in parallel, as we succeed with Iran, and Iran will not be in a position to help Hezbollah rearm when this is over. In other words, once they're degraded, they won't be able to once again come out and rebuild their capabilities. I think that creates better possibilities for the future. I have no doubt that the majority of people in Lebanon would like to live in peace with Israel. And we actually see that. You see that on, people who follow Lebanese social media, not just the Christian community, well beyond the Christian community. They understand that Hezbollah has turned Lebanon into a failed state when it was once, Beirut was once the Paris of the Middle East. So I'm saying I've got no illusions, right? We have to degrade Hezbollah. It's clear the Lebanese government doesn't want to and is incapable of doing it, right? So in degrading Hezbollah, we will help create a new situation. Like you say with Iran, we've got no bones against the Iranian people. Our problem is the regime, and we want the regime to fall, and then we'll have a great relationship. I think the same thing can apply to Lebanon. You change the military reality inside Lebanon, you defang Hezbollah, that allows other things to happen.
Well, I would agree, but the difference between Iran and Lebanon is, yes, I say we make a distinction between the Iranian people and the Iranian regime. Here, I'm talking about the Lebanese government. I wasn't talking about the Lebanese people. The Lebanese government includes Hezbollah. And guess who votes for them? Guess who has all these years have voted them into the parliament? I am saying that if a country cannot control it, see, in this case, it's not the same as Iran. The regime in Iran was terrorizing the people. Here you have the government that refuses to take the terrorists on. Now, you can say they're weak. I don't care if they're weak. If they're weak, then let them ask us, say, hey, help us. We're happy to do it. Not attack us, not rhetorically or in the other way. That's what I'm saying. I think the Lebanese government is appalling for daring to say one bad word about Israel under these circumstances. You say realpolitik, they should be praising Israel. Yes, you're right. There are Christian communities. There are communities in Lebanon that would love to have peace with Israel. And I'm now talking about that government is a disgrace. And the thing is this, we finally understand that all of those years with what happened to us on October 7th in Gaza, we cannot let this happen in the north with Lebanon. And it was threatening to happen because we also had that idea, come on, okay, we can tolerate a little bit of rocket fire. We can tolerate this and we can tolerate that. No more. And apparently, by the way, according to all kinds of reports about this clandestine operation yesterday in Lebanon, it wasn't a clandestine operation. I mean, we took out apparently hundreds of Hezbollah terrorists and operatives. But what was clandestine apparently is what is surrounding that operation. Some are saying that it is tantamount to the beeper operation, where all those beepers went off and severely wounded so many Hezbollah terrorists simultaneously. Apparently, we're going to know that later today. I don't know. There's going to be a press conference in the evening today, apparently, to talk a little bit about that. But let's talk a minute now about the hypocrites. Not just those like me who are nervous about a ceasefire, because we are skeptical that when it doesn't work out, and of course it won't work out with those animals, we're skeptical about going back to war. Once you stop 2 weeks, are you really going to resume? So, but that's one set of skeptics. Now let's talk about the hypocrites.
So I just answer, I want to say before we move on, I wanted to say something about Lebanon. There was a fighting in 2024. We did the beeper operation, we took out Nasrallah, and that created a situation in Lebanon. We hit Hezbollah hard, and this government, which you're very critical of, in Lebanon was elected, the first government in like decades that was elected that Hezbollah didn't approve, that they weren't happy about this new president in Lebanon, the new prime minister, right? And so, once again, there's a game being played in Lebanon. We have to be tough. We have to look after our own interests. We have to make sure, that the south is free of Hezbollah. That's all true. But in looking after ourselves, I think we're creating a dynamic that can be good for Lebanon too. That's what I'm saying. And look, it's true that we had yesterday 3 rockets. I think it was on Israel. And you can look at the 3 rockets and say that's 3 rockets too much. And that's, of course, correct. But what have we done since October 7th? They're no longer the Hezbollah shock troops. They're stormtroopers, the Radwan forces right on our border. And there was always a fear that they'd do what happened on October 7th, that they'd storm across the border and kill and massacre our people. They're no longer there. They can't do that. They also used to have this thing where they used to use, mortar fire and anti-tank weapons on the communities on the north, right? They can't do that anymore either. They've been pushed back, right? And so to say that we haven't reduced the threats on northern Israel, it's been done. It's being done. The job is not complete, I agree. But to say that the dynamic's a positive dynamic, and we've got to follow through. On your issue about the ceasefire and the hypocrites, okay? And I said it, I think, in my introductory remarks. Like the same people who didn't like the war in the first place then criticize Netanyahu and Trump for you didn't complete your goals, right? And they're trying to have it both ways. I want to address the people on the right. The people like you said your first instinct was to worry about it. Once the ceasefire happens, after 2 weeks, everyone loves the ceasefire. Everyone falls in love with the quiet, that we don't have bombs falling on Israel in the middle of the night. And the Americans are happy, and that it just keeps through when the Iranians play games with us, okay? So first of all, I'm not sure Trump can do that. I'm not sure that he doesn't get something very meaty on the nuclear issue. I don't think there's a deal with Iran. And as he, my words before, locked and loaded, he's ready to go. The forces are still there. The Iranians know what sort of pain they can, America and Israel can inflict upon them. And so there is a chance, right, they'll agree to a deal. And if they don't, I think it's back onto the fighting. And everyone will understand that Iran was not serious about negotiating on what it needs to negotiate. But I would also argue, if someone says to me, this deal, nothing's changed. They've only agreed to open the Straits of Hormuz, and even that they're causing problems. Yes, and in the end, they're the best negotiators. In the end, nothing will happen, and so forth. I want to give you the worst case scenario, and the worst case scenario is America doesn't go back to fighting. Israel, therefore, can't do it by itself against Iran, and we have this standoff that just continues. And then nothing's changed. And the critics will say, and this Iranian regime now is more committed than ever to an extreme agenda because, as some of the critics say, we've killed the more moderate leader, which I think is rubbish, right? How could it's like, all right. But I would argue the following, okay? Let's presume nothing else happens, all right? Which I don't think is true. I think Trump cannot allow that nothing to happen. He has to have some serious movement on the nuclear issue. But let's presume nothing happens, okay? You have to ask the following question. Let's go back to 27th of February, the day before the war broke out, right? Is Israel better off? Is America better off? Is the world better off? And only what has been achieved until now. Know what Netanyahu said last night, in many ways echoing what Trump said. Excuse me. He said, all our goals have not been implemented. And he said they're either going to be implemented diplomatically or they're going to be implemented by more military force, which was parallel to exactly what Trump was saying, but in different language. I'm saying if nothing else is done, and I believe they will be, yes, but even if you take the worst case scenario that nothing else is done, what has happened in the last 40 days? We've hit their nuclear program even harder. We've destroyed their ballistic missile capabilities. They still have some capabilities, but it's been largely destroyed. There are military industries to produce more missiles, badly, badly destroyed. Their nuclear infrastructure, badly, badly destroyed. Their economy, badly, badly destroyed. And one has to think, right, are we in a better off situation than we were 40 days ago? And the answer is undoubtedly yes. Our most ferocious enemy has largely been defanged. Not totally, but largely. And I said to you in a previous podcast, I said, don't let the perfect stand in the way of the possible. And one more point. It's a bit like when the United Nations in November 1947 decided on partition, okay? And people in Israel celebrated that the international community had given legitimacy for the establishment of a Jewish state. And people danced in the streets of Tel Aviv. Some people in Israel on the far right said, no, we can't celebrate because it doesn't include Jerusalem. It doesn't include the entire homeland, what the UN partition resolution. And Ben-Gurion said, no, but this allows us to establish a state. This allows us to bring in the Holocaust survivors. This allows us to start building a sovereign society. This allows us to build the IDF, right? That though I'm not happy that we didn't get Jerusalem, I'm not happy that we didn't get the whole land of Israel, but I'm willing to look at the half glass that's full, which gives me a victory. And I think even if we don't get everything we want, will we get enough to say, yes, the Iranian nuclear program, instead of just being weeks away, is now years away? Is that not important?
Oh, absolutely. I'm telling you, of course we're better off. The world is better off. Everybody's better off. Iran, as you said, has been totally defanged. But here's the, and that's excellent. Even if we stopped right now, they have no Air Force, Navy. They don't even have the ability to produce a missile launcher or a missile. What they've got left is what they've got. So the more they fire, they're actually running out. They're not producing more. Of course, there's that issue of China and Russia supplying them. But that's one of the reasons, as far as I understand, that the U.S. and Israel, that one of the military goals was to bomb the bridges, to prevent the methods for entering, for assistance to come from the outside. No, we're much, much better off. I was disappointed at first because the way I felt was we've got them exactly where we want them, and especially the United States has. And that's not the time you let them say, okay, so we'll agree to this and this. Here are our 10 points. No, you tell them you have no say in this. You open up the Strait of Hormuz or else. Now, here's the problem with the Strait of Hormuz, which very interesting problem here, is that President Trump understood that that causes, a global energy crisis and all that. But he said all along, America, we don't need the oil that comes through there. Europe needs it. Japan needs it. He was naming all the countries. Russia needs it. China needs it. We don't need it. So where is NATO? How come you people, what are you people doing? And in the end, he's the one who had to dictate to Iran, you better open those straits, and then, of course, he caused a whole scandal because he said, otherwise, we're going to destroy your civilization. Trump, he's not a wordsmith. He is a performer, and he has really, he has very clear ideas about what he wants to do, but the way he articulates them is sometimes loony. And the whole world went crazy when he said he's going to destroy their civilization. And, half a day later, he's saying, okay, we're sitting down to negotiate. My problem always is who has the upper hand. Now, we know that America has the upper hand, and Iran is completely, has really been decimated in every respect, except for one. And that is the Iranian people. Because while all of this is going on, and it's very good for Israel, it's very good for America and the rest of the world, it's not good for them yet. So, what we're hoping, again, the whole time we're saying, it's not up to outside forces to change their regime. It's not. But we needed to help them facilitate it because they were unarmed and they're being shot down. Tens of thousands were not only shot down, but even people who were wounded and in hospitals. You had these besieged guys, and also, by the way, militias from outside, Afghanis and Pakistanis, come in to help kill protesters and to kill people in hospitals and their families. So there is a really serious caveat, because Trump did say help is on the way, and help was on the way. And yes, this enables, let's say, usually weakens the regime, whoever's left in the regime, and helps the Iranian people. The trouble is they still have no internet, they have no weapons. And then I was hoping that maybe part of this 2-week ceasefire thing, maybe behind the scenes, this not us firing at them, had to do with our trying to arm them clandestinely while there aren't missiles flying in every direction to enable them to come out to the streets. That's my fantasy. I don't know if it's true. I hope it's true. But there is a serious problem there.
So first of all, I want to take issue with what you said about Trump not being a wordsmith, and that he says all sorts of things like he shoots from the hip with his mouth, right? And it's not logical. I tend to think there's a logic to what he does. And I think in saying
Hold on
that
one second, and I'll let you finish. There's total logic in what he does. It's his wording, his grammar, his spelling, his capital letters. It's not. I wasn't talking about his intention.
But I think
Go
the
ahead.
message. I think the message was very calibrated. I think he was telling the Iranian people when he said, we'll destroy the Iranian civilization. He wants them to think, right, that they have no choice, that he really is, that this guy in the White House, there's a theory in international relations called the madman theory, that people think that if my opponent is really going crazy, right, then I have to be very careful. And he was basically, you know, it goes back to Nixon and Kissinger and bombing Hanoi, right? If they think that my opponent is about to go and unleash because he's angry, right? I think only because he used such language did the Iranians finally agree unconditionally to open the Straits of Hormuz. In other words, from a point of view of the utility, I think his statement was actually very clever. People think Trump got angry, and I think it's calculated anger, it's calculated tough language, and therefore it's actually what is the only test? Does it work? And so far, that language has shown the Iranians have to fear the consequences of them not going along with the demands that they dismantle their nuclear program in a serious way. And they'll only do it if they fear that the man in Washington and the man in Jerusalem, unless they do so, they will face retribution. And when you use language like that, it's like a lever. It's getting you out of the ditch. It's pushing you forward.
No, you're right. It was the word civilization, because the Iranian people, they are the civilization. And it made it sound as though he was going to destroy Persian civilization, not the mullahs and the regime. That was the problem here. And even Iranian people, as far as I know from Iranian experts, have said that's dangerous language because the Iranian people think that means their culture. No, what he meant was, I'm going to destroy you all. And you're right, the madman. I understood that. It was a malapropism. As I said, Trump's use of certain words, he doesn't know. He's not great at language. He's great at conveying a message because he's a great performer. My point was this.
But if
he said, we're going to blow you back to the Stone Age. The point was that the regime in 1979 brought Iran to the Stone Age, okay? And even you keep saying the Iranians have to know. The Iranians, no, it's not the Iranians.
It's the regime.
It's the regime and the thugs who work for the regime.
That
was the trouble. The word civilization got Now, I understood he didn't mean that, and you're right.
I want to though go forward and raise what is a serious dilemma. You talk about, the poor Iranian people will continue to live under this regime. So if there's a standoff and no agreement, right, and a war of attrition continues, either we go back to full fighting, which is quite possible, or we go to some sort of war attrition with the Iranians, that means the sanctions remain very strong on the regime, which means that the regime will collapse because it might not be immediate, as we've said before on this podcast. Between the June war last year and the people rising up, it took 6-7 months. And so it might not happen immediately, but in the end, the regime will fall. If there is a deal, and let's be frank, and let's say a really good deal for the West, for Israel, for the United States, where Iran actually does give up its nuclear weapons and the enriched uranium already in Iran is coming out and they're very, stringent. The Iranians will demand, as part of that, and it's understood, it'll include the end of sanctions or the slow reducing of sanctions. That will give the regime a new lifeblood, because the minute the regime has the sanctions beginning to be reduced, that means that their economy's in the toilet, their currency's not worth anything, right? And that's one of the reasons the people are rising up, because the regime can't deliver for them. And so there's a sort of a dilemma here. If you believe in regime change, you don't want the sanctions to end. On the other hand, you want a nuclear deal, and I do want a nuclear deal. For me, that's the most important thing. Can we end once and for all the Iranian nuclear program? You have to pay for that. And the paying for that will be on sanctions.
No, that's a question. Not if U.S. troops go in and take out that nuclear stuff that's underground. I don't know if it's possible, okay? But I disagree with you. Well, it's a dilemma because we have to relieve sanctions, and otherwise we won't get a nuclear deal. Forget the word deal. No, we want to dictate to them and say, too bad. Okay, as you said, diplomacy isn't, okay, now that here's the trouble with the Strait of Hormuz.
Ruthie, you can't believe it's possible to get a good nuclear deal with the current regime, right?
No deal.
No deal. You're against any deal.
No, we have to go in there and take the nukes out. What do you mean a nuclear deal? They're not going to agree to it willingly in a deal, Mark. You need to dictate. You need to physically get it out. You need to force them.
Last night, Netanyahu said, right?
Yes.
Our aims, and first and foremost,
Either diplomatically
and the president says the same thing.
But diplomatically, no, exactly. But you don't have to give them a reward. Listen, even the Strait of Hormuz, what bothered me about that was suddenly that's excellent. Okay, open the Strait of Hormuz. And what? Iran is going to charge $2 million per ship fee. This is like we're paying them ransom. They held the Strait of Hormuz hostage, and now we're paying ransom by saying, okay, fine. And now they're going to get money in their coffers. It's true. Somebody said, okay, America and Iran will split the fee or something like that. It's like a toll booth. That's how Iran is going to make money? That's paying their ransom. That is outrageous. Okay. And then, by the way, they're already saying, no, we're closing it. If Israel bombs Lebanon, bombs Hezbollah, we're going to close them again. No, I am saying is that when Netanyahu says we got to get the nukes, either diplomatically or militarily, it's not that I disagree with that. I just disagree with your interpretation of what diplomatically is. Diplomatically is war is diplomacy by other means, right?
I just think I agree, but I think you are fooling yourself and any of our listeners. If there is to be a good solution to the Iranian nuclear program dictated to the regime, they will demand in response that there be some sort of sanction relief.
And that will-
and let me finish.
Yes.
I would argue that that's a price worth paying because the nuclear issue is the biggest threat to the Jewish state and the free world. And that if you have a chance to have a serious, verifiable, backed up by force, in other words, if we can, and you don't get the relief until the, what is it? The 400 kilos of enriched uranium is already taken out. They get nothing before that happens, so they can't play games and all this sort of thing, right? I would argue, as Netanyahu said last night, you just don't think it's possible. And maybe it isn't possible. But all I'm saying from a conceptual point of view, right? The idea that you're going to get a good deal without having to pay a price on the sanctions issue, I think that's an illusion.
But then the Iranian people are destined to be
correct
again
that's the price.
Under their
that's the price.
No. I'm sorry. The price is we're going to sacrifice the Iranian people under those.
Okay, so you as an Israeli, what's more important?
No, wait a minute. All are important. That would be like saying that about Hitler and the Holocaust. I'm sorry. It does matter what happens to the Iranian people, and it matters what regime is in power, because once they start getting money in their coffers again, they can start. And you say, yes, they need monitoring. We've heard that before. Okay, first of all,
Ruthie,
the International Atomic Energy Agency, you know what that's like, okay? It's like the UN and NATO and Europe. Oh, come on.
What you're refusing to do in this conversation, and I'm challenging you.
Go ahead.
Is that you're refusing to prioritize your goals. You're saying it's all important. I want regime change. I want the end of the nuclear program. I want the end of the ballistic program. I want the solution in Lebanon. You're saying they're all equally important. I'm saying
I'm not.
One of the things in people who are in charge of government is to say, I've got my wish list, but I can't do everything and I have to prioritize. And I'm saying the most important issue for Israel, for America, for those in the world who can think, yes, you've got a brain between their ears, is the Iranian nuclear program. That's what Trump said in the what you read out. And I'm saying if you can get a real breakthrough on the nuclear issue, the other issues are secondary. That's all I'm saying. And you have to be aware of that. And if you say nothing until regime change, you're closing the possibility.
No, I didn't say that.
Okay.
I didn't say nothing until regime change. And I don't say that all priorities are equal.
Okay.
I'm saying that the minute you say a good deal and you say, well, we won't be able to get rid of the nukes without rewarding that regime, there's where I disagree. No. You don't want to reward that regime. You want to kill that regime. You want to dictate to that regime. You want to say, we're the boss and we're coming in and we're going to watch you dig it up, or we're going to dig it up and blow you up while we're doing it. What I'm trying to say is that is part of the priority. It's not that obviously the Iranian people have to choose who their leaders are. That is not the point. The point is you have to stop having the mind frame. Would you have done that with Hitler? You don't make deals with the devil. What you do is you say, okay, we've decimated this, we've destroyed their army, their air force. We've realized now that they weren't as scary as they were, as we had all thought all these decades. Everyone was terrified of Iran. This is not the time to pay ransom. This is the time to say, okay, we're about to blow your head off, which is what Trump did. You're right. That's where they apparently came to the negotiating table. But my point is, you don't say, well, if we don't give them sanctions relief, then they won't comply. This is not what you do when you are asserting victory over an evil
when the
enemy.
Americans meet
Yes.
the Iranians in Pakistan, I think it's Friday and Saturday, right? Vance is going, the Vice President of the United States. If the Iranians come to the table on the nuclear issue, you don't think the Americans will offer sanctions relief? They have to offer them something. You think they're just going to dictate, they're going to bring an American document and say, you sign here on the bottom line?
No. What I'm saying, I'm not saying that.
Okay.
And I'm saying if they do what you're saying,
Yeah.
I will be upset about it. I didn't say they're not going to do it. I'm talking about the way you have to, just the way we say in Israel, we had to get rid of our conceptia that got us into trouble so many times. The West does that over and over again, and America is part of the West. And Trump, with all his bravado, he's also a Westerner. He's a Western liberal, like we all are. In other words, he didn't grow up under, an Islamist regime. But I have to say, it's better that he's doing this than any other president I could possibly imagine, because when he uses all those threats, at least he's talking like Middle Eastern language a little more. So we don't know what's going to happen at the so-called negotiating table. But again, if any deal that's made, as you said, has to be verified. And there's also a problem we've seen over the years. Who are the verifiers?
So
The verifiers are always people you can't trust, who are disgusting, who end up siding with the forces of evil in the world. And listen, you know how people are shocked every time, Trump attacks NATO? I'm sorry, I agree with him. Is there something not to agree with about what he says? You let us help you, and when the time comes, you sit there and you say, oh, no, thanks. No, he says a lot of true things, so I'm hoping and trusting in him that he will not let his vice president undercut that attitude in relation to these crappy little Islamist dictators who have no business being on the planet. That's my feeling. And I don't feel that way about the Iranian people at all. And I do think it's important to help them, because a better regime in Iran is also safer for Israel and the region and the world. Also, realpolitik.
I would tell you straight away that a change of regime in Iran is good for the Iranian people, good for the region, good for Israel, good for the world, good for the United States. It's good for everyone if they had a regime that was more moderate and more pragmatic, yes? The question is, and once again, I say, in the real world, you have to make priorities. And for me, Mark Regev, the focus has to be on the nuclear issue, which is an existential threat to Israel. It's a threat to world, stability and so forth. If it is possible, and I agree with you, I have very doubts if this regime, it's kamikaze to a certain extent, right? But if it's possible to get a real solution, I'm talking about a fictitious JCPOA,
Right.
sort of a real solution, which Trump will enforce because this guy's got good and solid instincts. Is it, if the Iranians are willing to make a change that they've not been willing to do up until now, I will see that as a major thing. And for that, I'm willing... I, Mark Regev, am willing to make concessions on other issues. That's the whole point. When you meet with him, right, there were no negotiations between the Japanese and the Americans in the Second World War. America gave a dictate, unconditional surrender. Trump isn't saying that. He's not saying that because he's also prioritizing his goals, right? And I think that's necessary. It might not be nice. I want to see regime change, right? I want to see different. But in the real world, I'm looking at what Netanyahu's saying. I'm looking at what Trump's saying. And I think if the Iranians play seriously on the nuclear issue, this can be over. Because I think that's the minimum necessary to end this. If they're not, we're back to fighting.
Okay, well, we know they're not. Okay, because that's all they have left. We know that. Okay. It's like with the Strait of Hormuz. My problem with that, again, was if you take away their leverage, that's what we want to do by destroying their Air Force and their Navy and all this, right? And then the Strait of Hormuz was their last leverage. And there's one way to look at this. Oh, good. You see, finally, they even had to give up that. But they didn't really, because they're going to get money from it.
We don't know that. That's still...
We don't know yet.
Yeah,
we don't know
correct.
yet. It just doesn't sound good. It doesn't sound good. What I'm saying is this. The nukes are their last leverage. And again, this is like a hostage situation, and you don't want a hostage situation with somebody you're defeating. You don't want them to say, well, in the end, really, we've got the upper hand because we've got the nukes, and now we get to meet with you, and we get to have ceasefires, and we get to say, oh, no, this isn't satisfactory. No, that isn't. So I am pinning my hopes on President Trump in that Truth Social post that I read at the beginning of the broadcast. Read out loud, because what he says is, no, they can't screw around with us because we're locked and loaded. You say we're ready. Our troops are ready to go back in. And I'm pinning my hopes on that because...
But you're also, and with this we'll finish because we've gone over
okay.
time. Good argument. We've gone over time. You're pinning your hopes also on the fact that the Iranians, and you could well be right, you're pinning your hopes on the Iranians refuse to make any serious concessions on the nuclear issue. And you could be right.
No, they lie.
Okay, because
no, they might agree, but they'll be lying.
No, but if they agree, let's be frank. If they agree, there's going to be a deal. And with that, we'll have to finish.
Okay, we'll finish, and by next Wednesday, we will see.
Maybe not. It's
what
2 weeks
happened.
next week, and next Wednesday's only 1 week.
We'll see. No, it will still be in a ceasefire, but we'll see.
Okay.
Anyway, it was a pleasure as always, Mark.
I look forward to speaking to you again next week.
Ditto.
Well, now joining us to discuss the latest developments on the war in Iran, as well as the IDF's operations in Lebanon, is Colonel Miri Eisen, a senior fellow at the International Institute for Counterterrorism. Colonel Eisen, always a pleasure to have you on ILTV. We saw President Trump's threats against the regime. What do you think could be next if the regime doesn't open the Strait of Hormuz or negotiate, or perhaps more importantly, what will it take for this regime to surrender in some form?
Let's start with the targeting itself, because he gave a very clear ultimatum, and he said within a certain amount of hours what's going to be attacked are going to be what I'm going to call infrastructure. Oil places, gas places. We're already talking about that basic economic infrastructure, which is such an important part for Iran. It's not just the regimes, it's already the country. That's definitely a stage that we have not seen until now, and I would expect that to be very heavily against the Harj Island, that same island with the possibility of taking it over, to really attack it. It's not a place that is populated by the population of Iran. It is most definitely what I would call a depot, an oil depot, and that would be the kind of place that you could just bomb extensively and see the change. What will bring about a regime change? That's going to take a long time. This isn't something that happens in the 4 to 6 to 8 weeks of this war that we're in right now. That's something that's going to be happening afterwards, I think, because whoever stays there afterwards is going to have to contend with Iran the day after. And that means looking at all of the destruction that they could have avoided, looking at the reconstruction and where the priorities are. And there I do expect to see a really big shift domestically inside Iran.
Well, hopefully for the people of Iran, we see something like that, some kind of change. But I have to ask for Israel, I mean, what is the end game at this point? What does success look like for Israel?
To me, it's already successful. Look at what's happening around us, the different countries and the coalitions. This isn't about being a Zionist and loving us, which I would love, but that's not what I expect. It's about viewing Iran, that Islamic regime, as being the world threat, not just the regional threat, as being a country that for so many years has not abided to any of the international agreements anywhere in the world, that went and attacked all of the different Gulf countries and continues to do so on a daily basis. So for us, That's when I'm talking about winning, etc. It's about changing the rules of the game, that the Islamic regime of Iran is not the one that's going to define, not for Israel, not for Lebanon, not for Syria, and certainly not for the Gulf countries, how this region looks. And that's already happening now. So we're getting there. I want them to have less capabilities. Every single day adds into that as well.
Now, I want to move to Lebanon a little bit because I want to ask you, how is the IDF's morale given these extended military campaigns? We have Gaza, we have Lebanon, we have Iran now. Is there fatigue in the IDF, and how much of an impact does that have on the execution of these critical military operations?
We've been fighting for 2.5 years. 2.5 years, something that we need to take into account. It has not been high intensity the whole time. When we're talking about high intensity in the real clashes, if it was against Hamas in the Gaza Strip, if it was both before against Hezbollah and again now against Hezbollah inside Lebanon, I wouldn't call it fatigue. What you do is you change and rotate between the different units. I think it's much more difficult for the reserve units, because the reserve units, can you imagine you're going home, you're working in your regular job, you're called up for reserves, you do 6 weeks of reserve duty if it's against Hamas in the Gaza Strip or against Hezbollah in Lebanon, and then you go back to your civilian life. So there's certainly the challenge of both PTSD and fatigue, but I think that the military builds itself in a way to rotate it. Can we keep on doing this forever? None of us want to be in a forever war. Every single person understands that we want this war to end, both against Hamas and Hezbollah and the Islamic regime of Iran, where the rules of the game have changed, where it isn't the terror organizations, the terror armies, and the terror regimes that define the rules of the game in our area.
Now, I want to ask, before I let you go, I mean, we have to talk about this historic rescue mission that we saw the United States primarily conduct. What do we know about Israel's involvement in this rescue mission, if anything, yet? I know we're still in the early stages, but we did see a historic event, a historic success for the United States. Was there any Israeli involvement that we know of in that?
Prime Minister Netanyahu already went out and spoke about how magnificent it is, and what he used in his terms was the word joint. We have been in a joint mission from February 28th. That's very unique. In a joint mission, you're sharing the intelligence, you're sharing the capabilities, you're sharing both the good and the bad. And I would say in that sense, it's joint. That means that we were there, we were looking, we're helping in any way. Obviously, it's a U.S. front mission, but we would have been there at every step along the way to help, especially with intelligence, perhaps even more, any way we can. Joint mission.
Now, I want to ask you one more thing really quickly, because we did start by talking about how the next targets inside of Iran are the infrastructure, which invariably also affects some of those Iranian people that have been under this regime's thumb for so long. What is your message, if any, as an Israeli to the people of Iran who will likely face, at this point, some degree of significant strikes on that infrastructure? I mean, how can they remain with high morale as much as they can in a difficult situation like this?
I think that every Israeli stands with the Iranian people. It's something that we've said every stage along the way. We are there with you. We understand both what it's like to be under the bombardments. We're under the Islamic regime, missiles and drones and terrorism, and our heart is not just with you. We're there to try and enable a different future for you. And my hope is that they will be able to last and to get through this just as we are, so that in the future we're going to build a different future. We are there with you. This is not against the Iranian people. It's against the terror Islamic regime, and that's the one that needs to go.
All right. Thank you, Colonel Miri Eisen, for your insights today.
Thank you so much.
The University of Haifa stands at the forefront of global impact, ranking #1 in Israel, and has been ranked among the top 100 universities worldwide for sustainability. Here, environmental responsibility, social justice, and academic research come together to build a better future.
U Haifa International also has adopted the sustainability perspective, where we take part also in high-impact work that is informed by academic research to ensure that we have a better world to live in.
From marine research in the Mediterranean to community-focused programs shaping peace and equality, students engage directly with the issues that matter.
It's not just a degree, it's an experience, and it opens your mind, your network, and your world.
Study where innovation meets purpose on a campus committed to progress, diversity, and global citizenship. Master your mind, live your Israel experience. Shape a sustainable future at U Haifa International.
For more than 200 years, when Israel's most vulnerable needed help, Kol El Chabad was there. When families can't afford food, when seniors are alone, when children are struggling to survive, Kol El Chabad steps in with meals, essentials, and dignity. Right now, thousands of families across Israel are counting on that help. And you can make sure it reaches them. Your donation doesn't just give charity, it gives hope, it gives strength, it saves lives. Kol El Chabad, helping Israel one life at a time. Scan the QR code on your screen and give now. Step into the story of Israel's heartland with Blessed by Israel, where every purchase connects you to the land, the people, and the promise. Taste the sweetness of the promised land in their delicious honeys, or wear the story of the land close to your heart with the stunning Special Places of the Land necklace. Behind each product is a family, pioneers living in Judea and Samaria, crafting beauty and goodness from the soil of the Bible. When you buy their creations, you're not only receiving something extraordinary, you're investing in Israel's future, helping small businesses thrive and communities grow strong. Join a movement that celebrates faith, resilience, and hope. Visit blessedbyisrael.com and use ILTV's special code BLESSISRAEL, that's BLESSISRAEL, at checkout for 10% off on your first order. Be part of strengthening Israel, one purchase at a time. ILTV News, your source for Israel in English. Reporting from the ground where it happens, as it happens. An authentic, trusted voice in daily Israel news. Airing on 11 international TV channels and now launching a 24/7 Israeli news channel. Reaching millions every month across all social platforms. Independent, real, powered by truth. We don't just report, we connect, thanks to a worldwide community that stands for truth. This is ILTV, your source for Israel in English.
Welcome back to ILTV on the Hour. I'm Sivan Raviv, coming to you live from Israel with all of the biggest headlines from across the region. Let's get into all the latest developments. U.S. President Donald Trump says the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz announced yesterday is set to take effect today at 5 p.m. right now. Trump says he has ordered U.S. Central Command to block all vessels headed to and from Iranian ports, even as he maintains the ceasefire with Iran and says it's holding well and could still lead back to talks. But Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is warning the ceasefire could turn on a dime after Iran failed to meet key conditions, including reopening the strait. Netanyahu says U.S. officials made clear they would not tolerate violations, with the central demand remaining the removal of Iran's enriched nuclear material and a long-term halt to enrichment. He added that Israel fully backs the U.S. blockade, stressing there is close, constant coordination with Washington. Let's take a listen to Netanyahu on this.
שוחחתי אתמול עם סגן הנשיא ג'יי די ואנס. הוא צלצל אליי ממטוסו בדרך חזרה מאסלאמבאד. הוא דיווח לי בפירוט, כפי שעושים אנשי הממשל הזה מדי יום, על התפתחות המשא ומתן. במקרה הזה, הפיצוץ במשא ומתן. הפיצוץ בא מהצד האמריקני שלא היה מוכן לסבול את ההפרה הבוטה של ההסכם לכניסה למשא ומתן על ידי איראן. הוא גם הבהיר לי שהנושא המרכזי שעומד על הפרק מבחינת הנשיא טראמפ בארצות הברית זה הוצאת כל החומר המועשר ולהבטיח שאין יותר העשרה או בהמשך, בשנים הבאות, וזה יכול להיות עשרות שנים, אין העשרה בתוך איראן. זה המוקד שלהם, כמובן דבר שהוא חשוב לנו, וכיוון שאיראן הפרה את הכללים, הנשיא טראמפ החליט לשים עליהם בלוקדה, זו מילה לועזית, למצור, מצור ימי. אנחנו כמובן תומכים בעמדה התקיפה הזאת, ואנחנו מתואמים עם ארצות הברית כל הזמן. היום התהפכו היוצרות. אנחנו אלה שצדים את צוררנו. הם שבאו להשמיד אותנו, הם נלחמים כרגע על הישרדותם. הכוח של מדינת ישראל, רק 80 שנה אחרי השואה, נראה בפני כל העולם. גם אם העולם שכח את לקחי השואה, אנחנו לא שכחנו.
As the U.S. imposes a blockade on the Strait of Hormuz, the IDF is preparing for a possible renewed conflict with Iran if there is a sudden collapse of the U.S.-Iran ceasefire. In what appears to be a coordinated leak by defense officials, all major Israeli news outlets report the military is not only increasing readiness, but also preparing for a possible Iranian surprise attack on Israel. A senior defense official is reported saying Israel may be considering renewed pressure on Iran over its nuclear and ballistic missile programs. The IDF alert level has reportedly been significantly raised, with Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir ordering broad combat readiness procedures and preparations for an immediate resumption of fighting. Zamir instructed the military to move to a heightened state of readiness, with all units ordered to maintain high alert amid the collapse of negotiations between the U.S. and Iran. President Donald Trump moved forward with the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz after Iran rejected key U.S. demands in ongoing diplomatic talks. U.S. officials say Tehran has refused to halt uranium enrichment or dismantle core nuclear facilities, central conditions set by Washington. Iran also rejected calls to end support for regional proxy groups and to fully reopen the strait to international shipping. In response, Iran's Revolutionary Guard is warning that any military presence in the area could be seen as a violation of the ceasefire and may trigger a forceful response. The IRGC insists the strait remains under its control and warns that any wrong move by foreign vessels could have serious consequences and may be trapped in a deadly vortex in the strait. An Israeli ground operation is underway in the southern Lebanese town of Binjbel, a key Hezbollah stronghold, with dozens of terrorists surrounded or fleeing the area. Troops raided a hospital used by Hezbollah, killing around 20 gunmen and seizing weapons after coming under fire from inside. The IDF says the site was used for military purposes. In a separate operation, troops eliminated the cell responsible for killing Golani soldier Staff Sergeant Tuval Yosef Lipschitz earlier this month. Here's Prime Minister Netanyahu on this.
אי שם, בלבנון, ברצועת הביטחון עם כוחותינו, עם חיילי המילואים הנפלאים שלנו, עם המפקדים הנועזים. הם עושים שם עבודה מדהימה, ברוח איתנה, בנחישות גדולה, ובהצלחות גדולות שכמובן צריך להכיר בהם. הדבר הראשון זה שהם מרחיקים את האויב מהגבול. ואנחנו לא מדברים על 5 נקודות, אנחנו מדברים עכשיו על רצועת ביטחון מוצקה, עמוקה יותר, שגם מונעת את הסכנה של הפלישה וגם מרחיקה את איום הנ"ט. הם גם מטפלים בכפרי הטרור שהיו צמודים לגבולנו, שם כל עמדת טרור ורבות הן פשוט משותחות. וכמובן הלחימה נמשכת, היא לא נפסקה, היא נמשכת כל הזמן, ואתמול היא התרכזה וגם היום בבינג'בל.
And the first direct Israel-Lebanon talks in decades are set for tomorrow at the U.S. State Department in Washington under American mediation. Israeli Ambassador Yechiel Leiter and Lebanese Ambassador Nada Hamadeh Mouad are due to meet and work toward an agreement between the nations to disarm Hezbollah. Hezbollah supporters took to the streets in Lebanon over the weekend to protest the upcoming direct negotiations between Israel and Lebanon. However, according to Lebanese media, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar pressured Hezbollah-allied Parliament Speaker Nabi Berri to halt the unrest, warning that street protests could escalate into broader instability. Reports say the pressure was aimed at preventing any moves that could undermine the Lebanese government or disrupt the planned negotiations with Israel. reports indicate that the protests didn't fail to gain the momentum that was anticipated, that organizers expected, and did not sway Prime Minister Nawaf Salam from advancing with the talks. The meeting in Washington is expected to focus on a possible ceasefire framework, a timeline for formal negotiations, and broader security arrangements along the border. But major gaps remain. Lebanon is demanding a ceasefire first, while Israel insists talks can proceed even as fighting continues. The talks come amid ongoing clashes and mark the first direct engagement between the two sides since the 1980s. The central obstacle remains Hezbollah, with Israel seeking disarmament and security guarantees, while the group rejects the process entirely. For now, expectations are low, with officials viewing the talks as a first step toward de-escalation rather than an immediate breakthrough. And a major political shift in Europe, as opposition figure Peter Magyar is expected and projected to win Hungary's election, ending Viktor Orban's 16-year rule. Israel's opposition leader Yair Lapid congratulated Magyar, expressing hope that relations between the two countries will continue to grow. The result marks a significant political shift in Budapest, where Orban had been one of Israel's strongest allies in the European Union, often shielding Jerusalem from criticism and breaking with the EU consensus. Last month, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had praised Orban, saying his rule brought safety, security, stability, and was like a rock in support of Israel. The election result is raising concerns in Israel over what a new government in Budapest could mean for its position in Europe. Orban maintained close ties with Prime Minister Netanyahu and US President Trump, and has frequently clashed with broader EU policy. In recent months, his government even announced plans to withdraw from the ICC after it issued an arrest warrant for Netanyahu. Experts say that while Hungary's political backing has been important, its practical impact on EU policy may be more limited, and the change in leadership is unlikely to dramatically alter Israel-Hungary relations in the short term. And as the U.S. blockade is taking effect as we speak, and the region may move closer to a broader confrontation with Iran, we're now joined by Jason Brodsky, Policy Director at United Against Nuclear Iran, and Brigadier General in Reserves Ilan Biton, former commander of the Israeli Air Defense. Thank you both for joining.
Great to be with you.
Good to be here.
So we're now seeing a U.S. naval blockade in the Strait of Hormuz. This is a new Trump move, starting effectively now, 5 p.m. Israel time. How significant of a moment is this in the context of the war, Jason?
Well, I think it's a very significant moment. This is really a continuation and another chapter of President Trump's brand of coercive diplomacy against the Islamic Republic. What the president does is he lays out the U.S. position. He gives the Islamic Republic a diplomatic off-ramp. And he prepares the CENTCOM theater for a military option should that become necessary. He offers the Islamic Republic a deadline to meet U.S. demands, and if they do not do so, there are military consequences. And so I think we're seeing what is playing out in the Strait of Hormuz is just another chapter of that same coercive diplomatic dance that President Trump has been employing against Iran.
And I'll ask you, Ilan, how, as someone who comes from the IDF for a long time, how difficult is it in practical terms to enforce a blockade like this, and what are the risks of it spiraling out of control?
Of course, it's had some of risk to both sides, but may I say that Iran regime is an expert in negotiations, mastering the art of saying no without using the word no. And if this regime will survive, it will be more dangerous. It will feel strong, very strong, because it survived against the US and the Israeli machine war. So this conflict can't add in a very weak agreement. And I think each side, President Trump and the Iranian regime, is using a strategy of, may I say, walking on the edge, and something will be happened. So we'll see.
Now, this comes right after the talks collapse, the talks in Islamabad in Pakistan. Do you see any realistic path back to diplomacy from here, Jason?
I don't think diplomacy is over with the Islamic Republic. I think that the president is trying to change the decision-making calculus of the current Iranian leadership. But Iran believes it's winning right now. And that perception of Iranian victory is what is going to need to be changed. And I think that's what President Trump is trying to do with this naval blockade. And the U.S. has escalation dominance here. And so I think that this has the potential to be one more move in a series of moves by the United States to try to shape that decision-making calculus in Tehran. But ever since Ali Khamenei, the late supreme leader, was killed, decision-making in Iran has become more diffuse, I would say. There are many actors, and right now the IRGC is really running the show in a big way. And these are very extreme actors, and they believe that there is a need to reestablish deterrence against the United States and Israel. And so I think it's going to be quite difficult to change that calculus overnight. And so we may be in for some more fighting to come.
Now, Iran is calling any military presence in the Strait of Hormuz a violation of the ceasefire. So does this effectively put the U.S. and Iran on a direct collision course? What do you think? Ilan?
Yeah. I think that we are really going on the edge. And this conflict in the Strait of Hormuz probably will be exploded because the U.S. Warships will be there. And I think that the Iranian will try to shoot something, try to escalate the situation. Otherwise, Trump said, I will block these Strait of Hormuz, and Iran can't stay without doing nothing. It's not part of their doctrine.
Mm-hmm. Now, assuming that Iran chooses to respond, what are the most likely scenarios? Are we talking about direct attacks on U.S. ships, on Israel? We know that Israel's preparing for renewed fighting. Is it possible they'll attack the Gulf states like they have this past month? What do you think, Ilan?
I think, first of all, if I'm trying to understand what can be here in Israel, probably they will try to some kind of preemptive strike. Mm-hmm. Not too many missiles, but they will try to launch more than several without any alert. Mm-hmm. Just, there is a way to fight against the U.S., but maybe sometimes they understand it will be better to fight against Israel and to surprise Israel. So we are ready. We are very familiar with all the threats. We have a very experience and lessons. So we are in full alert, and we'll see how it goes in the next hours.
Now, we're already seeing oil prices spiking and shipping disrupted. Jason, how much of a global crisis could this become?
Well, I think this is part of the Islamic Republic's strategy of asymmetric endurance, if you will. It tries to expand the geography of the conflict to try to create pain among U.S. allies and partners in the Middle East and in the broader global economy, also political pain for President Trump. And I think it's really a conflict and a contest of endurance, if you will. Who can outlast, each other? So whether Iran can outlast the United States or whether the United States can outlast Iran, and that's what's going to be taking place really over the next few weeks with this naval blockade that's taking shape this hour, and so quest and conflict over endurance is going to be pivotal in the months ahead.
And surely this latest Trump move is meant to hurt the Iranian economy and the IRGC, given that no ships will come in and out of Iranian ports. Isn't that right?
Absolutely. And that's the lifeblood of the Iranian economy. It could prove absolutely devastating for the Iranian economy if it's allowed to be implemented over an extended period of time. Likewise, the naval blockade is going to be, cause complications for China, which has purchased much of the Iranian oil in defiance of U.S. sanctions over the years. And I think the calculation is not only to change the Iranian decision-making calculus, but also to put pressure on China to, in fact, lean on Iran to soften its position at the negotiating table.
Mm-hmm. And how will this impact? Yes, go ahead, Elon.
I think there are two different huge issues. The first one, of course, the economic prices influence all the Western world. And the second one is this terror regime in Iran that influence the free world. And of course, with terror and nuclear capability and so on. So what is the first and what is the second? I think the first is the Iranian regime, because if we solve these issues, the economic problem that is right now temporary, not for good, will solve in the future. But if we stop and let the prices goes down again, and Iran regime will stay, we are not going to solve the economic issue for good. So it's very complicated how we deal with those two issues, but we should understand what is first and what is second.
So let's talk about the Iranian regime. Jason, this past month there were such high hopes that the regime would be thrown over, and that protesters, Iranian protesters, would rise and protest and overthrow their own regime, and it hasn't happened yet. Can you explain this?
Well, I think it's going to take time for that to happen. As bombs are flying, I think it's unrealistic to expect there to be, people, mass protests on the streets and Iranians overthrowing their own regime. We have to look back at Operation Midnight Hammer back in June of 2025. And during that operation, there were a lot of commentators and predictions that there would be this massive rally around the flag effect. But you know what? It never happened. And months later, in December and January, there were mass protests against the Iranian regime. So this is a long story that's going to play out over months and years. I see that there could be a protest again in Iran once the bombs stop. That the Iranian people are able to go out and try to express themselves in their anger against their own regime.
Mm-hmm. Now, from Israel's perspective, we've heard Netanyahu fully supporting Trump's move. But does this move with this blockade help achieve strategic goals? What do you think, Ilan?
I think the influence is that we didn't solve it yet. So we're trying to make this regime to agree, but I don't think he will agree. So probably this escalation will move ahead, and from Israeli interests, we can't afford this regime to continue for the future. But Israel is not change regimes and not choose kings. The people of Iran will do it. The street will do it. I also agree that on the future, it will be the time that this street will feel strong enough, and he will feel strong enough if Iran will be weak enough. And this timing, it's very unique, and it will take time.
So Israel is dealing with Iran, with Hezbollah in Lebanon. They are still not finished in Gaza. We saw the Gulf states impacted. Are we already in a full-scale regional war or not yet? What do you say, Jason?
I think there has been a regional war going on. Let's not forget that Iran has been attacking the GCC states with great intensity over the last few weeks. I think United Arab Emirates has been the recipient of more drones and missile attacks than Israel,
That's right.
even. I think it speaks to a real, the potential for generational damage in the GCC's relations with Iran. If you'll recall, before Operation Epic Fury, Iran was using its relationships with the GCC countries as its trump card. It was trying to portray Israel as the greatest destabilizing force. But because of the Iranian regime's own behavior, it now cast itself once again as the great destabilizing force. And I think it's ironic that for years, Iran has tried to encircle Israel in a ring of fire. Now, because of the way it's bombing its neighbors, it risks encircling itself in its own ring of fire. So I think that strategically, this will prove to be a real blow to the Islamic Republic's interests in terms of, attacking these GCC countries, because they once again view Iran as the region's primarily destabilizing force.
Mm-hmm. Now, I have to ask you, Jason, the fact that that Iran went after the Strait of Hormuz, this clearly changed and impacted the course of the war. But how was it not predicted? How did they not prepare for this? The U.S., Israel.
I think that it was the notion or the idea that Iran would close the Strait of Hormuz was absolutely prepared for many years at the Pentagon and also elsewhere. If you're talking to Pentagon military planners, I don't think that this would come as a surprise to them that Iran would try to shutter the Strait of Hormuz. So, this theory that the United States was surprised or unprepared for the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, I don't really believe that. It's a matter of a risk calculation, and President Trump was really the only American president since 1979 to have assumed great risk in trying to dismantle the terror capabilities of the Islamic Republic. And that's what this all comes down to, a risk calculation. His predecessors were not prepared to assume that risk, but he has been prepared to assume that risk. So that's, I think, how we can characterize the current situation.
Mm-hmm. And in the next 24 hours, 72 hours, what are the key signals you'll be watching that tell us where this is going, if it's escalating or if it's contained? What do you think, Ilan?
I can't, they will try to do something, maybe against the American warship, maybe against Israel. I don't know yet. But I would like to say, you have mentioned before, all those different arenas, Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthi, and Iran, all of those arenas are connected. And the influence of Iran will influence all the other conflicts. For example, in Lebanon. In Lebanon, we can't afford for the future that Hezbollah will stay as a terror organization. Maybe it can stay as a political one, but no armed terror organization. Now, we need to do it with Lebanon, state of Lebanon. The army of the Lebanon can't hit the Hezbollah capabilities. He can't took his arms. He can't. The only one that can do it is Israel. So if we'll severely crush the Hezbollah to the point where the Lebanon's armed forces can assert control over it, probably it will be the full solution. Mm-hmm. Because if we will have just a strip, to defend our villages, mm-hmm. So our villages will be enough protected, but 1 meter after the this border if Hezbollah will stay and can launch missiles from deep of Lebanon. We didn't do nothing. So the solution is, of course, in one hand, Israeli IDF will crush the Hezbollah till that point, specific one, will be weak enough and to pass it to Lebanon. And I hope it will stay for good, and maybe Lebanon will be part of Abraham Agreement, maybe 2.0.
Inshallah. Jason, Jason, we're seeing the first direct talks between Israel and Lebanon in decades. How significant do you think this is, and how realistic should our expectations be in face of these talks tomorrow in Washington?
Well, I think that the U.S. is trying to take advantage of what it perceives as a weakness of Hezbollah right now, but and also the current government's interest in trying to diminish the influence of Hezbollah. But I think we have to be realistic here in that Iran, unfortunately, given its interference in Lebanon, is trying to exert a veto over this process. And so it's not going to be smooth sailing. It's not like you're just dealing with the Israel and Lebanon here, when Lebanon does not have control over its foreign policy to a large extent because of the Iranian stranglehold over the economy. And that is why Israel is, is very wary, I think, of these kinds of talks with Lebanon because of the Iranian issue. So as long as the Islamic Republic is in existence, you're not going to have a final solution to the Hezbollah conflict with Israel because Hezbollah is an Iranian proxy.
And just briefly, what about the other proxies? What about the Houthis? We haven't heard from them lately. Jason?
Well, I think the Houthis, for a variety of factors, including some local variables and local equities, have been quiet. They have launched one, drone or missile attack against Israel since Operation Epic Fury began. But I think a lot of that is being held in reserve to preserve the Houthis, to use them as a card should the situation escalate. So the Iranians will try to close the Bab al-Mandeb and interfere in the Red Sea area, should there be an escalation on the part of the United States. So I think that the Iranians are holding the Houthis in reserve should there need to be an escalation on their part.
Okay, well, Jason Brodsky and Brigadier General in Reserve Ilan Biton, thank you very much to the both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This evening, we enter the eve of Holocaust Remembrance Day in Israel, Yom HaShoah, a time to remember, reflect, and honor the generations who came before us. Our main show will be broadcast at 7:35 p.m., and immediately afterwards, we will broadcast the official Holocaust Remembrance Day ceremony from Yad Vashem in Jerusalem. Now that's a wrap for this edition of ILTV on the Hour, broadcasting live from Israel in the heart of the Middle East. We're here every hour on the Hour with the latest breaking developments, in-depth reports, and exclusive insights into the stories shaping the region and the world. I'm Sivan Raviv. Thank you very much for watching.
If you are a Christian who hates Israel, congratulations. You have been manipulated by the Islamists, by Russia, by China. For over 1,000 years, there was one force that stood between the Islamic expansion and the Western world, and that was Christian civilization. They held the line because they knew exactly what they stood for and exactly what they were defending, and the Islamists never forgot it. They spent centuries trying to figure out how to finish what they started, i.e. the conquering of the world, how to take over what they would never be able to do just by force. And eventually, they found the answer. You wouldn't be able to defeat the Christians on a battlefield, but you could destroy their alliances. You could get them focused on the wrong enemy, and right now, that strategy is working better than any army ever did. If you are more outraged by what happened on Palm Sunday in Jerusalem than you are by what happened in Nigeria, then they are succeeding in getting you unfocused on the real problem. But you don't need to believe me. This is a playbook as old as time, and like always, it starts with knowing your history. Welcome to the Meira K Show on JNS TV. Let's start from the beginning. The year is 632. The Prophet Muhammad dies, and what follows is one of the most extraordinary military expansions in recorded history. Within just 1 century, Arab armies sweep across the Persian Empire, across Egypt, across all of North Africa, and deep into Spain. Cities that had been Christian for 600 years are now under Islamic rule, and the speed of it genuinely shocks the ancient world. So what happens when the expansion reaches the edge of Europe? The year is 732, and an Arab army that has already conquered Spain is about to reach the south of France. To understand what happens next, you need to understand what Christian Europe actually was at this point in history. Christianity was not just a religion in the way that we think of religion today, something you practice on a weekend and mostly keep private. It was the entire organizing framework of European civilization. It determined how kingdoms were structured, how laws were written, how communities understood their obligations to each other, and perhaps most importantly, how people understood what they were part of and what was worth fighting for. So when the Islamist army crosses into the south of France, the Frankish military leader Charles Martel rides out to meet them, not just to defend the territory, but to defend the only organized civilizational force in Western Europe capable of mounting any resistance at all. He wins, and that victory matters more than almost any other battle you have been taught about in school, because what he stops is not just the army, he stops the complete Islamization of Western Europe at a time when there is nothing else standing between that army and the rest of the continent. No other power, no other organized resistance, nothing can defeat them. Had he lost, the entire cultural, legal, religious foundation on which Western civilization would eventually be built simply would not exist. Europe as we know it doesn't happen, and it is the Christian civilization that stops it. Don't worry, their plans for expansion, however, didn't stop. They continue in other directions, into Central Asia, into Africa, and critically, they keep trying to push to Europe from a completely different angle. Whilst Charles Martel had blocked the advance from the south and the west, there was another front. Think of Europe as having 2 doors. Martel had just slammed one of them shut, but the other door to the southeast, through what is now Turkey and Greece and the Balkans, that one was still very much open. And it was actually being guarded by a different Christian empire entirely. Most people have never heard of the Byzantine Empire, but for 1,000 years it was one of the most significant powers on earth. It was essentially the continuation of the old Roman Empire, based out of what we now know today as the modern city Istanbul in Turkey, and it was Christian to its core. For centuries, whilst Western Europe was still finding its feet, the Byzantine Empire repeatedly defended Constantinople itself and held the door to Europe shut against wave after wave after wave of Arab armies pushing from the south and east. They held for an extraordinarily long time, and without them, again, the story of Europe would look completely different. All this is true until 1453, when they didn't succeed. The Ottoman Empire, a powerful Turkish Muslim empire that had been growing for over a century, finally breached Constantinople after a siege that shocked the entire world. The city that had been Christian for over 1,000 years fell. The great cathedral was converted into a mosque, and suddenly the second door into Europe was wide open. The Ottomans were now free to push directly into the heart of the continent, and that is exactly what they did. Into Greece, into Bulgaria, into Serbia, into Hungary, getting closer and closer to the center of Europe with every generation. For ordinary people living through this, it was an existential terror moving steadily in the direction. Which brings us to the 2 moments that finally stopped it, because, as you know, today the world is not yet an Islamist empire. In 1571, the Ottoman Empire had built a massive naval fleet, and it's pushing through the Mediterranean towards the western coast of Europe. A coalition of Catholic states put together a fleet to meet them off the coast of Greece at a battle called Lepanto, and they destroyed the Ottoman fleet, shattering the psychological sense of the Ottoman invincibility at sea and ending their expansion into the western Mediterranean. And then, critically, 1683, Vienna. The Ottomans send an army of over 100,000 soldiers to the walls of Vienna, which at the time is essentially the gateway to the rest of Western Europe. The city is surrounded. Tunnels are being dug under the walls. The defenders are running out of food and ammunition, and the emperor has fled. Europe is looking at the very real possibility of falling. And then a relief army of Poles, Austrians, and Germans, led by the Polish King Jan, arrives and launches the largest cavalry charge in history straight into the Ottoman lines. The siege collapses, Vienna is saved, and the Ottoman retreat from Europe begins. A retreat that does not stop for the next 2 centuries. And so the full picture is something like this. From France in 732 to Vienna in 1683, spanning nearly 1,000 years, it is Christian civilization that repeatedly absorbs the pressure, pays the price, and holds the line against Islamization. It's not perfect, and it's not without enormous losses, and it's not without entire Christian populations spending centuries under Islamic rule. But the pattern here is undeniable. And the people on the other side of that pattern, i.e. the Islamists, understood it very well. You see, they have a religious and moral obligation to take over the world with Islamization and Sharia law, and they had studied the battles which had broken them and why, and they looked to draw conclusions that echo loudly into the present day. Now, here's where the story gets genuinely complicated, and I'm not going to gloss over it because this complication is actually central to everything we're seeing today. For most of this history, Jews were not part of the stories as allies of Christians. They were victims of the very Christian kingdoms doing the fighting. Jewish communities were expelled from England, from France, from Spain. They were confined to ghettos, massacred in pogroms, blamed for the Black Death, and the Crusaders on their way to the Holy Land murdered Jewish communities across the Rhine Valley without hesitation. For much of the medieval period, Jews were actually safer living under Islamic rule than under Christian rule, which is a fact that tends to surprise people, but it's simply historically true. If we're being honest, the idea of a natural Jewish-Christian alliance is not something that comes from ancient wisdom. For most of recorded history, it's almost precisely the opposite of the truth, which makes what happens in the 20th century all the more remarkable and all the more worth understanding and protecting. The phrase Judeo-Christian civilization barely existed before the 1930s, and the reason it was coined when it was is itself a piece of history most people don't know. In 1933, Adolf Hitler comes to power in Germany, and the Nazi ideology he brings with him is explicitly anti-Christian as well as anti-Semitic. Hitler saw Christianity as a weak, Jewish corrupted religion that had softened European civilization. He wanted to replace it with something rooted in ancient Germanic paganism and racial superiority, and so for the first time, Jews and Christians actually found themselves facing an enemy who targeted both of them, who saw both of them as obstacles to the world he wanted to build. American religious and intellectual leaders looked at this and understood something important, that what was under attack in Europe was not just Judaism and not just Christianity, but the shared moral foundation underneath both of them, the idea that human life has dignity, the idea that there is a God who demands justice and mercy, the idea that power is not in its own justification. The basis of both of these religions was under attack, and so the term Judeo-Christian was deliberately coined to name that common ground and to say, these two traditions stand together because what threatens one threatens the other. But coining a term is one thing. Actually dismantling centuries of institutional hostility is another. And that's where 1965 comes in, which is a date that most people aren't aware of in religious history. But it is one of the genuinely most significant moments in the relationship between these two civilizations. The Catholic Church, the largest Christian institution on earth with over 1 billion members, had for nearly 2,000 years taught that the Jewish people bore collective responsibility for the death of Jesus. This teaching had provided theological cover for persecution, pogroms, and hatred across centuries, and it was one of the deepest roots of Christian anti-Semitism. In 1965, at the Second Vatican Council, Pope Paul formally and explicitly reversed it. The declaration stated clearly that the Jewish people as a whole could not be held responsible for the crucifixion, renounced anti-Semitism in all of its forms, and called for a new relationship of mutual respect and dialogue between Catholics and Jews. This was a revolutionary act and coincides, interestingly enough, with the finding of the Dead Sea Scrolls, but that's a story for another time. So by the time Israel was established in 1948 and this declaration came in 1965, something new had been built. Two peoples with a long and painful history between them had looked at the world and concluded that they shared something foundational. Similar scriptures, the similar conception of a God that makes moral demands on how we treat each other, and similar ideas that every human life carries inherent dignity, something that, as we already know, Islamization does not believe in. That, by the way, was not a small thing to find the common ground. It's actually a profound and powerful thing, and it pointed towards a real alliance rather than just a political convenience, especially when faced with forces that believed the complete opposite. For millions of Christians, particularly evangelical Protestants in America, Israel was not merely a political development, but something that felt like a biblical prophecy becoming reality. And many of them had been advocating for a Jewish state since the 1800s, well before most Jews were thinking about it politically. Suddenly, two civilizations that had spent centuries in conflict had a shared interest, a shared symbol, and a shared sense of what was at stake in the world. But all of this sounds nice and merry and exciting, but what has this got to do with the Islamization takeover? Well, if you are watching all of this new friendship from the outside, if you are part of a movement with expansionist ambitions and a very long institutional memory of which forces had stopped you in Vienna and in France, this emerging alliance would be something that concerned you quite a lot. Because they figured out that a unified West with Jews and Christians standing behind a common foundation and knowing what they stand for and believe and are willing to fight for is a formidable thing to go up against. But a West that has been turned against itself, that's confused, where the alliance between these two very strong entities had been quietly poisoned from within, that is a very different proposition entirely. If you can take the prophetic Israel and make it into something bad and negative, suddenly that religious connection to it starts to sway a little bit. Which is exactly why in 1991, the FBI discovered an internal document written by the American branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, the organization that is the ideological parent of Hamas and most modern Islamist political movements. The document laid out their strategic goals in plain language, and amongst them was what they called eliminating and destroying Western civilization from within. Not primarily through terrorism, but through culture, through institutions, through slow and patient reshaping of ideas over generations. And the single most effective idea to reshape, if you think about it strategically, is the idea of Israel. Because Israel is the living symbol and the concrete anchor of the Jewish-Christian alliance. If you can transform Israel in the minds of Western progressives in university culture and mainstream media from a democratic ally into a symbol of colonial oppression, you accomplish something extraordinary. You take the two civilizations most historically capable of recognizing and resisting your expansion, and you redirect their energy towards fighting each other. And while the fight consumes them, the actual story, the expansion, the Islamization of European cities, the persecution of Christian communities across the Middle East and Africa goes almost entirely unreported. But here's where it gets even bigger. Because this strategic insight did not stay confined to Islamist movements. At some point, other actors who are equally invested in the decline of Western power looked at what was happening and recognized something important. Russia looked at it, China looked at it, and what they saw was a playbook that worked. Not because it was invented by a single genius, but because it had identified a genuine structural truth about Western civilization. That truth is this: the religious and cultural values that underpin the West are too strong and too deeply rooted to be defeated by any external force head on. You cannot march an army into that and win. History has shown that repeatedly. But if you can generate division within, and if you can get the West to hollow itself out from the inside, you don't need to defeat it. You just need to wait for them to defeat themselves. So Russia's sophisticated disinformation infrastructure, documented extensively in the years since 2016, didn't just push political content, it amplified racial division, it inflamed cultural war issues, and it constantly pushed anti-Israel narratives into Western spaces, because sowing discord between Jewish and Christian communities in the West serves Russian strategic interests just as cleanly as it serves Islamist ones. Remember, they don't like religion, because religion defies everything that they believe and are fighting for. China's influence operations have followed a remarkably similar pattern, funding university departments, cultivating media relationships, and quietly amplifying the narratives that weaken Western cultural coherence without having to do anything other than online propaganda. These are not, by the way, coordinated operations in the sense of a secret meeting in a room somewhere. They don't really need to be. They're all separate actors who have arrived independently at the same conclusion. The Judeo-Christian alliance is the firewall of Western civilization, and the crack they keep hitting from every direction is the same one: Israel. The media narratives around Israel, the campus narratives around Israel, the idea planted carefully and watered consistently over decades that standing with Israel, and by extension standing with the Jews, is the wrong side of history for anyone with a conscience. Think about what that looks in practice.
The same week that a Palm Sunday procession in Jerusalem was all over every news channel, the story taken out of context to push a lie that Israel is against Christians, is the same week that over 200 Christians were massacred in Nigeria. Churches were burnt, families killed at worship, one of the worst attacks on a Christian community in years, yet you almost certainly did not hear about it, and neither did most of the world. They're hiding it or not even talking about it because not only does it complicate the narrative that has been so carefully constructed, it reminds people that it's not just the Jews who are targets. Christians are as well. There is a pattern playing out across multiple continents, and if that pattern becomes visible, if people start connecting the dots between what is happening to Jewish communities and what is happening to Christian communities, the questions they start asking become very dangerous to the people who benefit from the current confusion. The focus stays on Israeli military operations. An entire generation of well-meaning people with genuinely good intentions who want to be on the right side of history, are guided towards a conclusion that the moral position, the human rights position, the one that should be innately Christian, is to stand against Israel. But this was never about Israel. It's about a sophisticated plan to get an unbeatable team to fight between them so that they can be destroyed. The most important alliance in the modern Western world quietly is fracturing, one campus resolution and one church divestment vote at a time, and most people never notice what is actually happening because they are too busy arguing about the things that they've been handed to argue about. But the place where this strategy is now most visible, and where most people are completely missing what they are actually looking at, is the conversation about America and Israel. Because what has happened over the last years is that the Judeo-Christian alliance has quietly been rebranded. It has been pulled out of its moral and civilizational religious context and repackaged as a political question. Is this alliance with Israel good for America? Is Israel worth the trouble? Wouldn't America be better off without this complicated relationship dragging into the Middle Eastern conflicts it doesn't need? These sound like reasonable geopolitical questions, but that is precisely the point. Because the moment you reduce the alliance to a cost-benefit political calculation, you have already lost the thread of what it actually is and why it actually matters. You have taken something with 1,000 years of civilizational weight behind it and turned it into a line item that can be debated away on a cable news panel. That is not an accident, and it's particularly notable right now as a historic war against terrorism, an inherent anti-Western idea, is being infantilized to a debate about Israel manipulating America instead of being celebrated for the momentous occasion that it is, the taking down of the Islamic Republic, something that Americans have been behind for years. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs saw this clearly. He called it the new anti-Semitism, and he observed that it had migrated from the far right, where it lived for centuries, to the progressive left, and now into the political mainstream. And what made it new was not the hatred underneath, that's as old as history, but the respectability of